68 OCBA between the Government of Barbados and the Inter-American Development Bank on the program to strengthen public policy and fiscal management in response to the health and economic crisis caused by COVID-19 in Barbados.
The Committee of Government Notices.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of loan contract number 516A. Sorry. Oh, that's right. Sorry, I beg to give notice of a resolution to grant the sum of $32,754,030 from the Consolidated Fund and to place it at the disposal of the government to supplement the estimates 2020-2021 as shown in supplementary estimates number 8, 2020-2021.
Revert to government business and order number
214. Honorable Leader, the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Opportunity to lend my voice to the furtherance of this debate on the matter of these two bills, which both seek to give honor where it is believed honor is due, and award Barbadians for service in the name of and the cause of the country. Mr. Speaker, I don't believe in the kind of opposition politics that opposes for opposing's sake or criticizes just because you want to make a political point. I certainly don't believe in the politics of personal attack inside of here or outside of here, even on the political platform. And I say that just to set the backdrop for my next comment. And in speaking to the two bills before us, I want to take the moment to applaud the Honorable Minister of Health, the Honorable Member for Bridgetown City, for his leadership in terms of the health response or managing of the health aspects and related to the COVID presence in Barbados and its potential threat and potential wider spread in the absence of good management. COVID, of course, as we all know, presents an serious economic challenge for us. Virtual mountain which we yet have to climb. A virtual valley of darkness and of shadow which we are yet going through. But there's also the aspect of the public health threat that has existed, the well-being of the country. And of course, it would have taken some measure of astute leadership of that ministry, marshalling the forces in connection with that ministry, and then liaising with other ministries to stay on top of the situation. I am of the view, as many others are, perhaps all of us, we're not out of the woods and not clearly through the valley. But I would want to go on record as extending my compliments to the honorable gentleman from the city in terms of his role as Minister of Health with respect to the management of the COVID issue. Now, I don't know what else he's doing relative to the portfolio, for which I must compliment him or criticize him. I'm not dealing with those things because that's not the point today. I don't know yet if I'm to compliment him for managing situations relative to the QEH, the mental hospital, the polyclinics, all of the others. That day will come. And if I find at that moment he is worthy of such credit, I will be so honest as to do so. If I find at that moment he is worthy of some censure, I will do so as well. But today, I simply want to applaud him. I don't engage in platitudes and not necessarily easily moved by slogans and mantras. And simply to say I think that he has set an example of leadership with respect to his ministry over this matter, and that example should be applauded, and I want to commend him. I would admit publicly, and I've said it to him privately, I've been quite concerned as to the effect it was likely to have on his own personal health, stress related to the situation, and any attendant exposure to the very threat that he was trying to fight, or over which he was trying to lead the fight. And I'm glad that he maintains a good state of health physically, and he's untouched by that, and that he's of sound mind. And I just want to compliment him before I overdo it. He assumes a bit too much, let me say that, and be on my way. Mr. Speaker, I really do honestly. I want to say too, I support what the Honorable Prime Minister said this morning in relation to recognizing the worth and the value of the contribution, especially of those who have been on the front line of this charge and of this fight. When she did say that subject to consultation with the unions, the government will seek within its capacity to provide at least a one-off monetary award as a show of appreciation on behalf of the nation and the government for those who have given in the energies in leading from the front the fight against COVID and protecting all of the rest of us. So I support that notion. In fact, months ago, when we were busy applauding frontline workers every Wednesday, was it? I said then in this house, I've said it elsewhere, I still do believe it should go beyond the applause on a Wednesday evening, and there should be some monetary token of expression, of appreciation on the part of the nation, and in a tangible way that appreciation should be expressed. So I support that. I know government is limited at this time, especially with respect to finances, although if you check on the money being spent on consultants and professional services, you wouldn't think so. But certainly they are limited with respect to the finances available to them. But I think it would be a worthy gesture if in fact that monetary token of appreciation should be given. And I use the word token at this moment for lack of a better word. It should go beyond token and go to the extent to which the government has the capacity so now to do in this moment. I still also do believe that in addition to what we're able to give in the context of our financial constraints, we should consider giving these people some time off from their regular duties once we settle back down as a country, because some of them, as has been said in this very debate, have gone beyond the call and have worked over hours and extra hours and even on their Sabbath to minister help to others. And I believe in addition to the monetary award which will come, that there should be an award of some extra time in addition to the normal annual holiday which is given to them to show appreciation. So that's where this side stands on that. I want to mention something in passing before I forget. The Honorable Member Sir Michael Northeast, the Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister, when she spoke, made reference to some of the negative fallout from the COVID situation vis-a-vis the protocols, the prohibitions which we put in place, and her focus was on the mental health, generally speaking, of persons who are affected psychologically and otherwise, emotionally in that way. And I share those concerns, but I have a particular concern which I want to zero in on, and the Honorable Prime Minister didn't go there, so I would want to make sure that I put it on the table. As a pastor, you know, Mr. Speaker, people come to you with various concerns and problems. And one of the complaints, concerns, issues that has been raised with me recently is the already seeming negative effect or impact upon the emotional state of mind of our primary school children. I have been told by those who have charge of such children in a few instances thus far that there have been noted significant behavioral change I have observed that myself in our church, especially with reference to one young boy who was very hyper, very active, very bright young fella, but he has withdrawn to a state of relative quiet that troubles me. And these are the complaints I've heard from a few others. I want to say that if it is not already being done, that some study, perhaps some attention for sure, ought to be given upon or to the likely potential for negative emotional, psychological impact on our primary school children, because the regime of teaching and learning with them has changed. The protocols impact them as well. The prohibitions are applied at that level as well. And we are, in fact, out of force, out of necessity, denying children things which are normal and necessary to the wholesome balance and proper development as human beings. And I am really concerned about that. And I am sure the Minister of Education, the Honorable Member of St. Michael Southeast, as astute and as compassionate as she is or ought to be, would already have had that registered on her own radar. But it really does concern me because of what I see myself and because of what I have heard with reference to complaints or concerns which have been raised to me by parents and guardians, with serious implication for negative dynamics operating in the development of these children at this age, in this context. I am no child psychologist, but it would seem to me, I've been a parent of small children at some stage, it would seem to me that there's some serious aspects of behavior or behavioral development which will be impacted by this situation. Peer rivalry from early, positive peer rivalry from early is conducive and necessary to good human development. The growing child needs to be able to engage in that type of dynamic where there is rivalry, competition, contests with his or her peers. We carry that beyond the primary stage into our young adult lives. And the aspects around which we compete and contest and demonstrate rivalry may change, but that is a part of our life. And those early formative years exposed to that type of positive peer rivalry and competition, that helps to prepare us for this kind of setting here, where we have to compete in terms of the exchange of ideas and views, where we have to contest positions, where we have to counter arguments. It shows that some of us are a little bit deficient in terms of how we've developed around that, when one considers how we behave and react here, when counter arguments are given or questions are raised, arguments are posed. But that is so very important for developing children. The whole business of gender role, identity formation. Mr. Speaker, it did not suddenly appear to you one day in your young adult life that you were male and very male. You developed that gender role identity, that formation took place from the time you were very small. And you know that is a girl there, is a female there. You may not have known what to do about that at that stage, but as a female there, and I am a male over here. And it may have taken you years to determine what you do about that particular situation. Some of us came to that a little later than others. Some of us came to it a little earlier than others. Perhaps some of us are yet to come to it. But the point remains, Mr. Speaker, it is in those formative years, boys playing with girls in a primary school situation, and you get to learn what is a girl. And you get to learn, I am a boy, and I am expected to behave a certain way. And those gender roles, that formation is so very important. And I wonder if some of that is not being missed out on. This may be a brief period, but how long is too long? before a child is forever negatively affected by that type of situation. We have a big problem in Barbados today with the ability to resolve conflict among adults. And we don't wait till we get old to learn conflict resolution skills. And the school does not exist. The school does not exist simply to teach us arithmetic and English and other stuff at the primary level. But the primary level teaching environment also allows us to learn other things. And Mr. Speaker, I'm sure at primary school, you got engaged in conflict. I'm sure you didn't start it, but it ended up at your doorstep, and you had to be able to manage it. And you learned sometimes in pretty harsh ways that even if you are right and the other person is wrong, the fact that you got into conflict, which resulted in battle, in physical contact, then your teachers and your headmasters or headmistresses at that stage brought you to Christian understanding. And you know that even if I'm right, I ought to do my best to avoid physical conflict or conflict which leads to physical altercation. And children learn that from early. I still remember from primary school, Mr. Cuffley putting a flogging on me right after lunch. He waited till lunch ended, Mr. Speaker, St. Giles Primary, St. Giles Boys School. And he waited until lunch ended and 4 classes were gathered in the hall. And that is when he chose to inflict the punishment with his leather belt across my back. And I was right. George was wrong. Joe was right. But we both got it. And you learn that even sometimes when you're right, perhaps you do a better thing if you walk away. And it is not only cowards who walk away. Sometimes it is those who understand the uselessness of carrying conflict to a certain stage. So these children today need to learn these skills, because in Barbados we have a problem with our young adult people not being able to resolve their conflicts. Even mature adults are struggling with that in Barbadian society today. And social engagement skills, so very important. We need to learn how to interact with each other in a social way. And children start to learn these things, and from very early, we don't recognize it, we take it for granted. But we're now living in an environment where perhaps the distance that obtains between our children in the school setting, the protocols, the prohibitions, it could be that these things are having a negative effect, which can be enduring and which will cost this society and economy much more down the road if it is not properly monitored. So I simply ask if it's being monitored, if it's being studied. If it is not, I really want to register my concern on behalf of parents out there, some of whom might be struggling with this very issue, Mr. Speaker. Now, what we seek to honor with these 2 bills and the awards that are entailed therein, in my view, Mr. Speaker, is the real Barbadian spirit. I am not so naive as to recognize that the Barbados in which I grew up as an adolescent, in which you lived as an adolescent, has not undergone significant change with respect to what we call the Barbadian spirit and what is really the essence of being a Barbadian. There have been some positive changes. There have been some serious negative changes as well. And I think, I would hope, what is intended here and what's being attempted here is really an initiative to recognize what is really the true Barbadian spirit, and to reward what is truly the real Barbadian spirit, so that we might see it further encouraged in every possible circumstance. I say that because, Mr. Speaker, there are those who serve in the interest of this country without any consideration for material gain. Some of those persons are located right here in this chamber today. And I believe from my experience over the past, 22, 23, or whatever it is, years in the parliamentary life and politics of Barbados, there are those of whom I have been impressed, that this is the mindset they brought to this business, that they're here to serve not for material advancement. Now that is quite contrary to the popular view that exists out there. People believe that everybody who comes to elective politics is in it for some material gain, some material advancement. And there have been clear examples of those who were so possessed, clear examples of those who were so motivated, clear examples of those who succeeded at that. But there are also some examples, glaring examples, of those who were not in that way motivated, and those who have not, after many years of service, been in that way blessed, because the material acquisitions that have come their way during the life of public service are not such that anybody can easily, honestly say, you got that because you served in this way. And I think that that's part of the real Barbadian spirit, that there are many who serve without any concern about material. We've heard it said in here already in this debate. I think it was the Honorable Minister of Health who said it. There are those who serve not ask how much I'm going to get out of this, what about overtime and all of that. And that is part of the real and true Barbadian spirit. And I think that these bills are intended to salute that and to honor that. And there are those who serve without recognition. Of course, there are the boys in the village who, at the prompting of no one, once an emergency situation breaks out, will respond. You've seen them in St. Michael Central. You've seen them in the city, Honorable Member. I've seen them in St. Michael West. A house goes up, and the fellas on the block that we write off as loss respond spontaneously, without training and without a thought, sometimes to their own well-being. And they go into burning flames to rescue an old lady who is fairly immobile, or an old gentleman who can't see. Or it may be that those who occupy this dwelling are fit as fiddles, but they need help in this a moment of threat. And fellas on the block, and those types of, and these guys respond and they're not recognized necessarily when it happens. They do it as a matter of course. Newspaper might take a picture if they so desire, the newspaper that is, or if they're on the spot. But these guys do that without prompting and with no thought of that. And there are people who serve in state institutions, people, as I said, who serve in the political arena. They're not looking for recognition, not looking for material advancement. They're in the NGOs of this country, in the charitable organizations of this country, and the churches of this country. Some of them, and not everybody who serves in the church, especially at the leadership level of the church, is in it for the money. And there are people who represent what it is, in my view, to be truly Barbadian, who serve irrespective of what. And I think that the gesture here is well-intended, if it is intended to recognize that type of effort. Of course, there are those who serve in a context where there's an obvious lack of appreciation. Not only do you not seek for recognition, not only do you not seek for material advancement, but sometimes when you do, there's an obvious, evident lack of appreciation. And yet, people press on and do what they have to do because it is in their DNA. It is part of what makes them Barbadian. And they're happy to serve without pause for thought. Here I'm doing my best, and they don't even care. Politicians know about that. Hey, you all can say otherwise, but we all have constituents who demonstrate that type of attitude. You do your best for them. Mrs. Speaker, you know that well. I know that well. We're political neighbors. And you do your best. Hey, and you, sorry, sir. Hey, and you help 99 times. But when they come the 100th time and you fail, or you're not in a position to help, you are the worst person in the world. You know, but you do it nevertheless. Do it nevertheless. And they berate you in front of your face, behind your back, some of them, not all of them, thankfully, a minority group. And you know they're doing that, and they come back for help, and you give them the help, because that's what you're there to do. You're seeking to serve, even in the face of an evident lack of appreciation for what you're trying to do. Sometimes the resources are not even at hand to do the job that is needed in the area of service that you seek to provide for your country. And I'm sure that there were limitations on resources and equipment for those who are on the front line of this struggle. Thankfully, the country found itself in a place where, in several instances, we're able to find the resources to help to get the job done. But in spite of that there are many instances still to be reported that the resources were not there, the equipment was not there, and but yet people did what they could to get the job done. And some serve, Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the fact that they make great sacrifices with respect to their family and family life. And it can't be easy for anybody who is devoted to family and who feels like family is devoted to him or to her to have to make the sacrifices in terms of time, sometimes, in terms of finances, putting yourself at the disposal of others at the expense of family members. But this is, to me, what it is to be truly Barbadian. I speak from a perspective of Christian relationship with my Lord, but I think that it even goes beyond that. And even outside of being a Christian, coming from a Christian experience, a Christian perspective, there are those who serve with a sense of humanity such that they're willing to put others before themselves, and before yourself sometimes mean before your family. You can identify with that, I'm sure, Mr. Speaker. And politicians should be able to identify with that. And I think that these things are very much in keeping with the true Barbadian spirit. And if these bills, this legislation is intended to address that, then it is a good thing, which I would fully support. These values really constitute what it is to be a true Barbadian, and I'm sure they are embodied in the persons who are on the front line and exemplified in the way they went about serving the country in this moment of crisis and this moment of need. Now, you can say what is positive, what is good, but you always have to give a balanced perspective as you see it. And from where I stand or sit, there are a couple of questions that I would have to raise, or a couple of comments that I feel it necessary to make. In this bill, the Humanitarian Service Award Bill at Section 4, subsection 2, it seems to suggest to me that the identification or the identifying of persons to be awarded is solely at the discretion of the Prime Minister of the day. If that is so, I do not know that I support that. I think that if these are truly national awards for service rendered in the national interest, those who are identified as deserving of these awards should not be restricted to those who catch the attention of the Prime Minister or who are so awarded based on the recommendation of the Prime Minister only. I don't make that as a political comment or an attack on the Honorable Member of St. Michael North East. That is a general thing. If we are going to be awarding people on a national level for national duty, national service, especially in moments of crisis and serious challenge, then those who are so awarded should be identified outside and beyond the scope of the discretion of a singular person or singular person in the office, in this case, in the office of the Prime Minister. I notice as well that if you look at the two bills together, as the opposing voice on this side, I think I have to say that we've got to be careful in Barbados that we don't devalue the worth of honors conferred upon people, especially at this level, by embroiling the award in the mire of politics, if I might put it like that. We need to avoid politicizing the process. I don't think that this is the first place in the world that a point like this will be raised. If you do some research, you will find abroad, near and far, there are those who raise this issue with respect to the conferring of national awards. Often it can get embroiled in the political machinations of the day. It can become very subject to the political cultural practices that obtain. And I would not want to see us dilute an award at this level and of this nature by making it easily subject to politicization. And that's the point I want to make. I remember when we introduced, I don't recall the specific title, but the number of people that we are supposed to honor every year from abroad and at home. And I was concerned about the numbers then, and I said it then, because I still am of the view that the numbers indicated in that schedule, in that legislation, suggested that we would be given a whole set of, I can't remember, it's 240 per year awards to persons. They felt that that is too many. It would dilute the value of the thing. It is not, and I was not saying then, as I was taught to be saying, I was not saying then that we can't find that number of people. I was simply saying that that number of people with that degree of frequency could have the negative effect of diluting the value in the minds of those who receive, the value of the award in the minds of those who receive the awards. So we should not subject or make it easy for recognition of people who do honorable service to this country, especially in a crisis situation such as we are intending. We should not dilute that by making it easily subject to political influence. I notice also with respect to the Gold Award that the intention is to move the number from 1 to whatever. Now, I don't like the idea. I can live with moving it beyond 1, and it would be good to know what would have informed the thinking around the number of one person for national, that Gold Award, one person annually. What would have informed the thinking of only 1? I could understand what informs the thinking that we need to do more than 1. But I do not know, Mr. Speaker, that we should leave it as an open-ended situation, such as the legislation purports to do. Also notice that with respect to that Gold Award, it was linked to National Heroes Day. And I believe that that would have been an attempt to underscore the importance of those qualities embodied in our national heroes and seen to be critical and desirable in nation building. I would have thought, therefore, it was an attempt to instruct citizenry as to the values that we uphold and hold high and treasure, such as embodied in our national heroes and which might be replicated right across our citizenry. So to delink it from National Heroes Day, I do not know necessarily that that is the best thing to do. It is not the thing that would tell me I should vote against it, but I just put that out there. I think we're wanting to teach, especially our young and up-and-coming citizens, what we see as the real Barbadian spirit. What we see is the true value of citizenship, how citizens behave themselves, what are the qualities that we want to see inculcated in our young adult people as they come along from our school system and from our homes and family units and come up the line. And I think if we delink it from National Heroes Day and just leave it to the discretion of cabinet as to when these awards should be made. I don't know that that is the best thing. Nation building is much more than having to do with proper management of the economy or the healthy building or the building of healthy institutions. It is also about teaching good values, good qualities of citizenry and patriotism. And one of the ways you do that is by example, by models, by the embodiment of such. And I think persons so recognized become the models that you want to encourage other people to emulate. One last thing before I sit down, Mr. Speaker, is simply this, and I want to support my colleague, can I say colleague? I want to support my comrade from St. Philip West. St. Philip West, we're colleagues in arms. We're on the political front line. We may fight on different spheres, but I think we are pursuing a common cause, and that's the good of Barbados. I want to support the honourable member of St. Philip West. I heard him recently suggesting that we need as a nation to learn how to better treat people who have served at the highest level in this country, especially in the political arena and in the politics and government of Barbados. I've said this before, nobody listened, nobody probably listened to him or probably listened to me until it is them to be honored. But I've said it before long ago, and it first dawned on me, Mr. Speaker, when having served as Prime Minister of this country, and especially in difficult times, and having taken a principled position with respect to economic policy and suffering for it, I saw Sir Lloyd Erskine Sandiford, after he'd ceased being Prime Minister, struggling to find a car parking space, attending some event, I think it was around Parliament or around Hero Square. That hurt me to see that. And it hit me then, and I said it then. And we don't treat these people, in fact, we don't treat ourselves properly. Because it's not the political thing to say that politicians are not well rewarded, awarded, and remunerated in Barbados. And I'll get shot because I am speaking as a voice of opposition. And I am not pushing my own cause. But we, in this public space, over long years, do not properly represent our own cause. And politicians are not managed and handled properly, and they're not properly remunerated. I don't make apology for saying that. And they're not properly rewarded for the service which they give. Now, I can say that. I can say that. Some of you fellas who just start, don't go there. I can say that, but that is a fact. You compare what happens in Barbados even with some of our neighbors who are not as well off economically as we are. And if you do the comparisons in real terms, but politicians in Barbados are not treated properly, notwithstanding what the public is made to believe, notwithstanding what the media helps to propagate out there. They're not treated properly, not provided properly for with respect to when they have health challenges. I thank God I've come this far without any health challenge while I have been here, any serious health challenge. But I know of a couple who have been, and I do not know all of the details, and I can't speak to recent times because you thrust me out of your bosom and I'm not over here. But I was aware when I sat with others, when I sat with others, quite aware of some of the challenges they had, especially with respect to health challenges. I remember one particular fella saying to me he went away on government business and found himself immediately faced with a serious, serious health challenge, which would require a financial response, and was not in a position to do so because there's no provision for anything like that. The country sends you out there to do its business, but they don't care how you survive out there or if you get back or what state of health you're in when you come back. And I really didn't mean to go into all of this. I really want to support Honourable Member St. Philip West in his call to treat politicians properly. But the truth of the matter is, they're not treated properly. They don't speak up for themselves because we're afraid that people would think that we are self-serving. And I'm guilty of that. There are lots of things I should be saying about the office of the leader of the opposition. And when I'm no longer there, I will say those things. But I don't appear to be self-serving. But like I said, I'm at the other end from you guys. And these things have to be addressed. And I think seriously so. So when fellows have served here honorably, served at the highest level, and we have prime ministers out there that are run about and beat about and no sort of dignities or courtesies extended to them. That is bad. That is bad. There's a lot about the U.S. that we don't like, but there's some things about the U.S. and their system that we must applaud. There are lots of things about other places that we don't want to emulate, but there's some things that we really should really seriously copy, and that is one. So how do we treat people? How do we treat people? So when a former prime minister comes into my church, if he's coming to a service or if he's coming to attend a wedding or a funeral, should I not give him the proper courtesies and address him properly? I should. And those things should be mandated. Those things should be mandated. And we need to put in place a framework that treats to these things. Now, I want to stop. I spoke longer than I intended to. And I said some things earlier, which I hope will not be missed. But I know the public space out there. And there are those who will pick up on the last couple of things I have said. And I hope that they do. But I hope they remember that I said other things as well. So I support in this regard, Mr. Speaker, the bills. I call for a close examination of what's happening to our children. I call for caution as we set up a system of awards beyond which we now have, that we don't subject it easily to political influence. And I call for a better deal for politicians in Barbados, current and former.
Honorable Mr. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir, I rise to then just a few words in support of both the Barbados Humanitarian Service Award Bill and the Gold Award of Achievement Amendment Bill. There is a young woman, a frontline worker, who's very close to me. Her daughter is also very close to me. And some time ago, her daughter sent her a photo that she had taken. And it was an image of the sunset. And she said, "Mommy never gets to see the sunset because she's working against COVID." She's 6 years old, that's what she said. She said she's working against COVID and she loves the sunset, so I took this picture so she could see it. That, for me, embodies what the people of Barbados, the frontline workers, the people who support the frontline workers, because not all of us are on the front line, but it takes a whole supporting structure. It takes a whole community to be able to respond in the way that this country has been able to respond to this pandemic. And I start there making that point because that particular young lady works in such a supporting role. She is one of the many people who is not a doctor or a nurse or works in a lab, and they have done tremendously important work. But she's one of those people who had to do some of the work of changing the structure of healthcare administration and making sure that apart from the increased number of beds and apart from all of the equipment and the other things that had to be put in place, we also had the people and the institutional arrangements to be able to make all of this happen. And she is one of the people who got up in the morning early and went to work without knowing what would be, if any, the change in remuneration or what would be the arrangements, but really just understanding that this was not business as usual, that this was an emergency situation, and that this was being done, Mr. Speaker, not for the government, but for the people of Barbados. I think that Barbadians came together in this crisis out of an understanding that it was their work that would mean that their neighbors and their families would be able to survive and would be able to live to tell the story. And as we went on, under the leadership of the member for St. Michael Northeast, the Honorable Prime Minister, and the Honorable member for the City of Bridgetown and the member for St. Michael Southeast, and the team. But as we went forward, I do believe that the people of Barbados and those workers were buoyed by the fact that Barbados was starting to distinguish itself as an example in how to handle this crisis. And as I listened to people who worked at the lab or people who worked at the University of the West Indies, and as people came together to talk about how we would manage this, people were motivated, not just because they needed to and wanted to take care of their fellow Barbadian and those who live here, but because there's something about Barbadians, sir, and I heard the Honorable Prime Minister say this in this chamber a little while ago. It is not that we feel we are. It is that we know we are. We are often in the position of being turned to for regional and global leadership. And the people of Barbados knew that this would be such a time. Not just leadership in the international arena, but even leadership in communities, to be able to wear your mask, and to be able to observe the protocols, and to be an example in the communities in which they live. And so this is one of the reasons that this Humanitarian Service Award Bill and this Gold Award of Achievement, and us being able to award it to more than one person, and not just at a particular time, that is the reason that these things are so important. I mentioned in particular the University of the West Indies, and the Honorable Prime Minister in leading off, and the Honorable Minister of, member for the City of Bridgetown, the Minister of Health, went through all of the different categories. And you know, one of the risks that you run when you try to start to name categories is that you forget somebody and you live in perpetual fear of doing that. So I'm not even going to try and do that. But I do have to acknowledge not just the healthcare administration, and I'll come to other roles that the Ministry of Health and Wellness played in other parts that people might not expect. But I have to acknowledge the University of the West Indies and those who immediately came out and said, listen, there are things that we need to know that we don't yet know. Research is what we do. Modeling is what we do. Forecasting is what we do. Let us help. And, you know, I remember having a conversation with the member for the City of Bridgetown and saying, because, I mean, there are roles that we all have to play. We aren't all the Minister of Health, thank goodness. But there are roles that we all have to play. And I remember having that conversation with him and saying, do we know what our numbers are going to look like? Do we know the things that we will be called on to do as the numbers change? Who is dealing with this forecasting business? Who is looking at this modeling? And that is the conversation that led to the further involvement of the University of the West Indies. And they came with all of their thinking and with all of their explanations, and will, not only being willing to teach, but willing to learn and being able to share in this collaborative space. And I really have to acknowledge the team that has been doing the research there, and has also given some leadership to the global community in terms of how we address this issue of modeling and forecasting. Their work, together with the work of the Ministry of Health and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, also allowed us, and in particular, the chair of the QEH, the PS and team in the Ministry of Health, and the deputy chair of the QEH board, and the team at the QEH as well, allowed us to very quickly put together that operation for the European Investment Bank financing for COVID-related healthcare expenditure. The Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast made the announcement this morning, hot off the press, that we received word that the operation had been approved for up to 50 million euros in COVID-related health expenditure. Now, the reason that we were able to very quickly put that information together, and we certainly know that the European Investment Bank and the European Union tend to require perhaps a lot more detailed information than many of our other partners. But it was because of the tremendous planning in terms of procurement, in terms of knowing exactly what things cost and what you would need. It was because the Ministry of Health and Wellness and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital had done that planning quickly, but had done it, and had the capacity to be able to keep abreast of that information, that we were able to put together all those numbers, and we were able to go back to the European Investment Bank and get these concessional terms for this refinancing. The colleagues from the bank even said to us, this is perhaps the best example of how we've received information and how well thought out and planned out and specific it has been in the countries that we've worked with in this operation. But I want to say something very quickly about why this kind of financing is important. The Ministry of Health and Wellness in 2019 went through an estimates process, just like every other ministry, where they came to us in the Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment with a program, with some ideas for the expenditure and for the revenue to say, this is what we expect to earn, this is what we expect to spend. I once heard somebody say that COVID is like looking both ways before crossing the street and then getting hit by a plane. And that is really what happened to that ministry. It happened to all of us. But when they came to estimates and they put forward what they put forward, never in a million years would they have believed that they would have to, by January, February, March of the following year, then have to start to really think about, well, how do we finance a response to a pandemic? There's something that people don't often think about in the last 9 months as we've been dealing with this. And it is the fact that this pandemic did not put on pause any other health-related issues. People still got ill from other kinds of things. People still got into accidents, regrettably. People still had fractures and all kinds of other health issues that the health sector in this country had to address. And so what happened, not just in the healthcare sector, but in many other sectors, is that the pandemic sucked all of the air out of the atmosphere. Because when you had planned your resources for certain things at certain times, here comes a pandemic, a 1-in-100-year event, and tells you, oh, you thought you were going so, well, come so. And so what this operation, what this financing, with the help of from the European Investment Bank allows the sector to do, is to then reorient resources to the areas that may have had to wait because we were trying to keep people alive in the context of a pandemic. And so it's very important that we understand that the health sector is one where there are many things to respond to all at once. There are many balls in the air. And I have to say, I have to give the utmost credit and respect to the Minister of Health and Wellness and the team who continued to do an accident emergency and accident emergency expansion, continued to address the issues related to vector-borne diseases and dengue and all of these things, continued to engage, increase the nursing capacity in terms of the nurses from Cuba and from Ghana, continued to roll out the community health workers, and all of these other efforts alongside everything that was going on has now brought a national cancer plan for the country and is really able to walk and chew gum and skin coffins, as we would say, because that is what has been necessary. And while other countries are barely even able to keep abreast of what's happening with the pandemic, the Ministry of Health and Wellness in Barbados is able to not just deal with the pandemic, but also to continue to address all of the other healthcare issues that we have to address on a daily basis. The fact that we had to deal with COVID has called for all kinds of restructuring, and it's not just in the healthcare sector, but there's also certain changes in the structure of the economy and the nature of commerce. And so I say these things because I want us to have the full picture of how so many people in so many sectors and in so many places had to shift and had to adjust and had to come with new ideas. COVID created a new economy in Barbados. When we talk about the legislation that addresses a national payment system, when we talk about modernization, it is because everything had to be shifted quickly. We had to start delivering pharmaceuticals, people's drugs, to them. We had operators, we had people who worked in the delivery economy that very quickly rushed in and filled that gap. You know, there are people who called us up and said, listen, has it ever occurred to you that you might be able to use delivery services in this way or in that way? Has it ever occurred to you that we might be able to assist? They didn't ask how much they were getting paid. They didn't ask anything about any arrangements. They came in and they understood that we had to restructure the economy. We had to make way for a digital economy, for a delivery economy, for a gig economy, where the nature of work and the way that we do things was changing. And all those people who came with their ideas, who came with their new business models, all those people we have to acknowledge, and we have to mention them when we talk about how Barbadians have stepped up to the task. On the issue of how we had to deal with financing for COVID, it is not just this recent operation that allows us to address the financing issue. A short while ago, I was able to lay a loan contract that sees the government of Barbados, again, accessing concessional resources. And I have to say concessional resources because I always have to repeat the point that 2 points. All countries borrow. But the second point is that the mere fact of borrowing does not mean that there is something wrong with what a country is doing. We came out of a decade where even if Barbados wanted to borrow from somebody, nobody would allow them. You know when you go into a certain shop and you see the signs that tell you no credit here? That was what Barbados, that was the position in which Barbados found itself. And the fact that based on our advocacy and based on our fiscal rectitude, we are now in a position of accessing concessional, as in low interest resources over a longer term repayment period, makes our economy more sustainable. And so that loan contract that was laid earlier is for the amount of US $120 million that we now have access to as a policy-based loan to be able to address the fall off in revenue that was caused by COVID. We will shortly lay as well another loan contract that sees us being able to receive US $100 million from the Latin American Development Bank to be able to address the fall off in revenue. And we are discussing with the World Bank for the first time in decades being able to access exceptional borrowing because these are exceptional times. So that is Barbados, excluding the World Bank resources, Barbados $440 million, about the same amount we estimate of the fall off in revenue for this fiscal year that was caused by COVID. I want to say something very clearly before I advance from this point. And it is that there are countries in the world that are trying to get access to borrowing to be able to fill their financing gap and cannot, for various reasons. This period, and the reason that we have been making the case for the ring fencing of COVID-related debt, is that globally, if we are not careful about how we handle global debt in this environment, we are headed for an international debt crisis if we do not carefully plan at an international level. This is not about Barbados, no, because ironically, Barbados least needs the help in terms of how we treat debt in this pandemic and post-pandemic world. But we are doing the advocacy on behalf of our neighbors in this Caribbean region, on behalf of other small island developing states and LDCs, or least developed countries, because if we do not together chart a sustainable debt path for the entire world, the world will be in a debt crisis. Having come through the last 2.5 years that Barbados came through, where we were able to get our debt on a sustainable path, Barbados actually is probably the country that least needs to make this case. But we make the case because no man is an island. And no island is an island in this context. Because whatever happens to the rest of the region and the rest of the world is going to affect us. And I say all of that to say that I want, through you, sir, to disabuse us of the notion that because we borrow, it means that we are not managing the economy well. It is not debt in itself that is problematic. It is making sure that it can be serviced. And under the BERT plan, we have made sure that the path that we are taking is one that is sustainable and one that we'll be able to service. The last point I want to make, sir, is one that relates to a point that was made by the Honourable Member for St. Michael West in his intervention. It's not often that I find myself in the position of agreeing with the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, but it's the season for all kinds of it's the season for all kinds of miracles. I want to pick up on this question of mental health and resolving conflict. It is a bit unfortunate that the Honourable Member chose, in making the point, speaking about the importance of socialization, he ironically, in making the point about how we need to make sure we continue to invest in young people's resolution of conflict and conflict skills, in illustrating the point, he happened to actually glorify some physical violence that was perpetrated on him when he was a student. So it is a little bit of an uncomfortable illustration that was made, because I do believe that if we want to address some of the mental health and socialization issues that seem to be affecting us more in this pandemic reality, that we have to reject physical violence. And so, apart from the story of being beaten that he used to illustrate the point, the underlying point is one that is sound. Mr. Speaker, we just ended on December 10th, 16 days of activism to end gender-based violence. This year, we saw, and it is not by any means an isolated case, but it is perhaps the most recent case that comes to mind, the murder of a young woman by an intimate partner. And it seems to me that apart from the sense of loss and the sense of grief and the senselessness of the act, we were not outraged enough. We heard colleagues from UN Women, the National Organization of Women, and other institutions tell us how, in the context of this pandemic, gender-based violence has increased. I haven't seen specific numbers. Again, I don't think we collect enough data about it, and we need to collect more information. But I don't think that we can have a conversation about how to help people cope, how to address people's mental health, without having a broader national conversation about this other epidemic, this other national health crisis that is taking the lives of Barbadian women. We were too silent, sir, during these 16 days of activism to end gender-based violence. Because this is not an effort that can be driven from a department in a ministry. Yes, they need the resources in order to be able to do it, but it calls for action by each Barbadian. It calls for every man to call out and reject the kind of behavior in his friends and his colleagues that suggests that intimate partner violence or gender-based violence or violence against women is okay. It calls for the rejection of that. It calls for all of us to say, listen, it is not okay to speak to her like that. It is not okay to touch her like that. It calls for us in the context of the schools and in community-based groups to not just think we are teaching math and English and coding, but to understand that we are teaching young people how to relate to each other. It is never too early to say to a young boy that is 6 or 7 or 10 or 11, as I do in the communities in St. Michael South Central whenever I see it. It is not too early to say, no, that is a young lady. You must not touch her in that way. Or to say to young girls, it is not all right for you to put hands on somebody in an aggressive way. And so, as I have said to my colleagues in this honorable place before, we are not going to achieve true gender equality unless we address this notion that, or this atmosphere that allows gender-based violence to persist. This is one of the issues when it comes to resolving conflict that we have to speak about. And I do not say it because I am a woman. And I do not step away from it because I am a woman. I think that we all have to be mindful of the fact that we, men and women, bring all kinds of perspectives based on our life experience and not to step back from it. And so what I would say in closing on this debate is that the work that has been done in response to this pandemic has been nothing short of yeoman or yeowoman. It has been nothing short of tremendous. And it is fitting that we acknowledge it, not just with this symbol of appreciation, but as the Honorable Member for St. Michael Northeast, the Honorable Prime Minister said earlier, that we acknowledge it in a tangible financial way to be able to honor the men and women and young people and children who have made their contributions. But I do want to remind us that the work of addressing this pandemic, the work and the transformation of making sure that we continue to live in a harmonious society must continue. And the effort that we have seen has to be applied to other things that ail us. The work that we have seen has to be applied in other places where people are losing their lives because we have not done enough. And so with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I commend these two bills and I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Member for St. George North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure that many of us in this honorable chamber can well recall about a year ago when we were making plans for regathering. There was a lot of anticipation that we would be reconnecting with our culture. We would be recalling the sense of community within our various parishes. We would be linking up with a number of people, relatives and friends who would be coming in from overseas to attend the many festivities, the many functions that would be planned all around regathering. All like no last year, that's where we were, much anticipation. But then something else visited, COVID. COVID happened, and it knocked all of those plans, regathering, changed to we inside, we masking up, we put lockdown, and so on. And we heard the many different iterations of it that were being put out on social media. And anticipation and excitement turned to fear and anxiety among many within our communities. And I context it there, Mr. Speaker, because the two bills before us are bills that emerge really out of a reflection of what took us from the level of anxiety that was being experienced when COVID visited to where we are now, Mr. Speaker, on the 15th of December. I'm sure that when COVID came upon us, that there were many who are listening to this debate today that could not consider that Barbados could be in the position that it is now. Of course, we have had 7 deaths, and we regret that we have had those deaths, but that we are here and we can look around and still see many of our families and friends who've not lost their lives to COVID-19. And especially when we look at other countries where the situation is not as positive as it has been, or has not as been as successful as it has been for us here in Barbados. I'm sure that that context is what makes us all as Barbadians really proud of what we have achieved, and the fact that we can stand here to debate a bill which contemplates an award that will be conferred on an eligible person who renders outstanding service to Barbados, yes, but as we have been made aware previously and again here in this honorable chamber, that it will be delivered to many Barbadians who helped us through the COVID-19 crisis, and that they will be honored. The bill contemplates, Mr. Speaker, giving recognition to what the trade union movement worldwide recognizes as a hidden army of workers. And while we regard it as a hidden army of workers, is because in many respects, the workers that have been on the front line of COVID-19 have not been workers that were regarded by and large by many people as being significant. So permit me not to mention the doctors or the social care workers who, of course, performed outstandingly. Permit me not to focus on the politicians who led extremely well in their various portfolios to bring us through what has been a very challenging year as we've been battling COVID-19. Permit me not to focus on those in the essential areas, the generally classified essential areas like policing and so on, who we would expect in times of crisis to step up to the plate. But permit me to focus, Mr. Speaker, on those in the gas stations, in the bakeries, in the supermarkets, delivery workers, transport workers, those who kept our water and storage intact, those in our ports, who notwithstanding their own anxieties, who notwithstanding their own fears generally presented by operating within the unknown, because COVID-19 was new to everybody and it was scary because it was killing people all over the world. Permit me to focus on these people who were called upon to deliver us through the crisis and who stepped up to the plate, selflessly in response to a pandemic. I wonder if many of us, or enough of us, have taken the time to consider what it would have been like if the gas station workers, the gas station attendants decided that they were not going to work. I wonder if we have taken the time to consider what it would have been like if the workers in the bakery determined that they were too scared to go to work. I wonder if we truly consider what the outcome would have been if the port workers, those who were the dockers, the operators, if they decided that they were too scared to mingle among their peers to deliver the goods that many of us needed, that our hospitals needed in terms of supplies, and many of us needed for food during the period, especially the period of lockdown. Mr. Speaker, of course, they did not contemplate as they made the very conscious decision, notwithstanding their fears, notwithstanding their anxieties, to go to work and deliver us through that period. They did not contemplate an award, but yet here we are, recognizing that although they did it out of a sense of selflessness, that they deserve to be honored for what they have done and what they have brought to this country. And so I am happy, sir, that we can be saluting them. So the pandemic has taught us a lot of things. It provided an opportunity for many of us to reconnect with our families. As I said, it provided an opportunity for us to recognize something very fundamental, that workers matter and that every job matters. Because sadly, we have had to lament too often that within our society, there seems to be a feeling that there are only those jobs that are considered academic that are the big up jobs or the jobs worthy of mention. And Mr. Speaker, it reminds me of the story in the Bible of the widow's mite. Not the big, extravagant things, not those things that would be valued by the average person as being great, but being able to give of yourself and give sacrificially at a time when people need it most. And that is what these frontline workers, many of them, were able to offer us. Yet COVID-19 has also shown up some very ugly truths about systemic inequalities within our society, within our economic system that is failing the very people who in times of crisis, and I refer not only to COVID-19, but who will be called upon when we have a natural disaster, a hurricane, for instance. These are the people most at risk. Workers who, when stay-at-home orders are in effect, become the lifelines of the rest of us. And these very workers are the ones who are living paycheck to paycheck. I mean, it can be argued that all of us are living paycheck to paycheck, but that happens if we decide that we are not always going to stay in our lane and stay within our means. But these are the people who don't have that option. Those are the people that I am speaking about, who are forced to choose between, and they were forced to, in the COVID-19 environment, to choose between minimizing risks to their health or negotiating risks to their health and making enough money to see their families through. Mr. Speaker, the trade union movement regards these workers as the hidden army of workers because, as I said, many of them were never valued before. But now we had to recognize them, and today we are recognizing them as mattering more than anything else. But one of the things that I observed during the COVID-19 period, particularly during the period of lockdown, I do recall that on Wednesdays, we designated Wednesday evenings as a time that we will stand outside our houses. Time to get out of the house, at least for fresh air, that you feel safe, nobody can come and snatch you up because you're outside the house. But we designated that as the time that we could go outside our houses and that we would be able to applaud these frontline workers for their efforts. And I do remember seeing clips of people not only applauding, not only developing jingles and so on, bigging up these workers, but people coming up with their pots and fans and everything, and we were dancing and celebrating these workers that are now the subject or very much at the center of this humanitarian award. And I want to commend the government of Barbados for recognizing the effort and the contribution too. And it's important that I say that, Mr. Speaker, before the next thing that I'm about to say, because as we applauded these workers, do you know, or are we aware that some of the very people that were supporting and promoting the applause were the very people who were constructing and devising that as soon as the country opens back up, many of those workers would have found themselves on the breadline? Because it happened. It happened to supermarket workers. It happened to workers in retail, workers in delivery, who were on the front line and who we now hail and who this award will now recognize as humanitarian. Mr. Speaker, I believe that this award is a good thing. I believe that it is a right thing. But now, having experienced the value of these workers, and having had cause today to reflect on the value that they brought to our lives during this period 2020, I'm heartened that this government also recognizes, and is caused to recognize in any event, that we cannot cut corners in attempting to do the right thing. So we cannot stop at a humanitarian award of service. We cannot stop at a pin, whatever designation, whatever form it takes. Because many of these very workers, key workers, essential workers, frontline workers, important workers face stark inequalities relating to their pay that have to be addressed, to their job security that have to be addressed, to the hazards that they face in their workplaces. And again, I go to the gas station attendants as a good example, because many of us, when we go to fuel up, can't wait to get out of the gas station because of the fumes, the scent, and we could feel it at the back of our throats, or we feel it in our heads if we have to be there for any length of time. But these workers are the same workers working at wage levels below what the average person should be expected to live off of, working without conditions, working without health insurance, working without basic PPE. Yeah, there will be some of them pregnant too, compounding a bad situation. So the question is not if we're doing a right thing, but how do we move beyond that to do the right thing for these workers? What is the right thing for workers who had to physically show up for their jobs during the pandemic, and who will be called upon to show up during any other emergency? Increase wages, yes. Improve conditions, improve healthcare monitoring, health insurance, PPE, and the like. The right thing, Mr. Speaker, must be done in spite of a very vocal minority of people who would even attempt to rubbish the strides that we have made recently in this country regarding our approach to a minimum wage. A minimum wage that would recognize and that would uplift many of these workers that we would affix or attribute a pin to. Many of these very workers are the workers that will get a pay raise on account of a minimum wage that is being discussed in this country during the next 3 months. And all honorable members in this chamber must exercise their influence in encouraging other people to see the importance of what is being done, to support what is being done, and to work tirelessly to ensure that come the 31st of March 2021, that we would be able to demonstrate that beyond the award that these workers will achieve in January 2021, that they have a lot more to look forward to in terms of the upliftment that a government committed to enfranchising its people is committed to do and will do. So I mentioned, Mr. Speaker, that we have not had the worst of experiences on account of COVID. But certainly, when we look at what has happened in other countries, when we see the challenges that are being experienced in other countries, when we recognize the tremendous loss not only to jobs, but to lives in other countries, I'm sure that we pat ourselves on the back and we say to ourselves that we have done well. But beyond this, we recognize that if we are really well intending, and if we are really committing to doing well for our people, then the very tangible award that we will place on thousands of workers during January 2021, and going a step beyond to uplifting the floor of their wages, the wage levels that many of them can be anticipating in another 3 months, are very important first steps towards delivering everything that we came to government intending to commit to. So, Mr. Speaker, we recognize that Rome wasn't built in a day. And while we recognize that everything can't be done at once, we recognize and see what is being done here, what is being contemplated here, as a signal that it is never too late to do the right thing, but it is important not only to trim and attack it in little bits and pieces, but to express a firm commitment to doing the right thing. It's a good first step, therefore, and I am very happy and pleased to be able to support it, but I signal us that the journey is far from over. 2020 has definitely shown all of us the need for substantial improvements in worker conditions and in worker protection. I'm encouraged that the government is on a good track, and I know that with strong leadership and with firm commitment and with the insistence of the many of us who would ensure that we follow through on our commitments, that we will get there. I just want to take this opportunity before I sit to encourage all of us to continue to work steadfastly to ensure that Barbados remains a country that recognizes workers as people first, that understands that every job counts, and that our people must not only be observed as vehicles to exploit and to gain profits when it is convenient. Our people must truly be recognized as being a symbol of who we are, and in recognizing that, we paid tribute to them in ways such as the award, and going further to ensure that we uplift them and truly enfranchise them. So, Mr. Speaker, I support the bill. I support the bill not only for all those workers who deserve our thanks, but I support it for all those workers who deserve our respect and, more importantly, our support. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged.
Honorary Member for St. Philip North.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to add my voice to the current debate. I can only but agree with all the sentiments of the members today with respect to the bills, and I too agree and support the initiative being presented. First of all, I want to offer my congrats to the Honorable Minister of Health and Wellness, who I think did a fantastic job with respect to the COVID pandemic, and also to all the ministries that contributed. The Honorable Member for the City is one person I can honestly say, although he was not personally involved with the planning of the COVID and on any of the committees, he was one that was always willing to listen. I would call him in the middle of the night. Whether he took my advice or not, I'm not sure. But he was always willing to listen to me, and I want to salute you on a job well done and still doing. I agree here that the frontline workers need to be recognized. But I also ask myself, although I agree with every member here, about who the frontline workers are, and the Honorable Member for St. George North is on the same wavelength as me. I ask myself, who are really the frontline workers? Everybody knows about the doctors at the hospital and the A&E department, and the ones that volunteer and the nurses too at Paragon and Harrison Point. But there are those of us, and I am giving myself a pat on the back and my other colleagues, who, despite not working directly with the COVID, we stepped up and recognized that life still went on. We still had to see the children with the asthma, we still had to see the hypertensives and the diabetics and whatever calls were left, because there weren't many left after COVID came in. But we had to step up. Some of us did not have access to the PPEs readily. I had a doctor working with me. The minute I said I had no PPEs, she backed off, and she had other comorbidities, which the Prime Minister says is a new word. That word has been around for so long. But I'm glad it's reached the general public now so that we can understand the implications of it. But there are those of us who had to step up. There was no hiding from COVID. We had to turn up at our offices every day, sometimes 5 to 7 days a week, and risk our lives and our families' lives to step up. And I do want to recognize my colleagues in assisting with that. I also want to, I wish somehow that I could break these medals in a lot of pieces, because there's so many people that I would love to be able to hand medals to, and I would list them now. Yes, the healthcare workers, I want to recognize it, especially now that it's clear and ever present in my head, the members of the environmental health departments of the polyclinics, and the COVID liaisons, which I'm also grateful to you, through the speaker, to the member for the city that gave these people jobs and opportunities to work with respect to the COVID response. I want to applaud them, especially the St. Philip Polyclinic, where they had environmental issues. The roof part of it fell in at one point, but these gentlemen and ladies worked. I had a event lately, and I was a little annoyed because one of the health inspectors kept me back, but for good reason. He made sure that everything was on point with respect to the spread of COVID. He made sure the books were at the door. It was a fantastic effort. I want to recognize them. People wouldn't remember, but when COVID hit, there was no end to the masks that we saw on every corner of the street. People stepped up and made masks. Yes, they make $1 for themselves, but everybody was in it together. These people made masks and sold masks, and who did not give away somehow got. The government supplied some of them too. And I'm extremely proud of these people. All of them want a piece of this medal. I want to recognize the teachers, because the pandemic, this room makes it feel like the pandemic is coming to an end. It's alive and well in many parts of the country. And there are frontline workers like the teachers and the nursery assistants that look after our children 5 days a week for the whole term, which has now ended. I want to applaud them. They did not have to, but they made sure, and the monitors, they made sure that our children were safe, that they wore their masks, that the playtime was well supervised, what little playtime they had. I want to congratulate them. The people in the schools that clean every day, maybe 2, 3 times a day, to wipe off the desks, to make sure the teaching staff and the students were safe. Mr. Speaker, I cannot sit down unless I recognize the Sandy Lane Trust and now the Tanglewood Charities. There are as much frontline workers as any doctor on this country, because without them, I am not sure what would have happened. These people stepped up and provide funding for many of our constituents. And without them, I know a lot of them would be much worse off. It gave me a lot of work, but it was good work and still going on. I really want to recognize them. And the other people I want to recognize, I'm the chairman of the National Assistance Board. When COVID hit, yes, some of our members had to be quarantined for obvious reasons. Some of them were contracted the disease. But even in quarantine, they worked. The home helpers got a lot of stick for coming to people's houses. Yes, some people backed off from the program, but they donned their PPEs and they were in people's houses helping. They never forgot the old people that were out there that had no one else to look after them. They stepped up in the middle of COVID and went to work. I want to thank them and congratulate them and offer them a piece of this medal. Those are the people I am so proud of. But that being said, we have to look at and anticipate the fallout from this pandemic. Anticipate the fallout and put measures in place to tackle practical, they fall out. And the honorable leader of the opposition alluded to it. The children are probably my biggest worry. Their schooling, and it was necessary, their schooling had been cut down. Some were going to school 2-3 days a week, and it worried me as a parent. My daughter was happy because she hit school. She does well, but she hit school, so she was on top of the world. Ooh. But I was worried, and along with other parents, they were worried too. The fallout is real. Children learn through interaction and play. Every animal, at least mammals, learn by play. If you watch a goat outside, the mother, they play. That's how they learn. And school has been affected so much. We are seeing children putting on weight because they can't run around outside as they usually do. Some of them, if they're only children, do not have an active neighborhood, because even with the pandemic, all of them were close to one another. The chances of them contracting would have been small because they were like families. But there's some children that did not have a playmate. And I worry for the psychological effects of what COVID will be doing to them, as well as some of the teachers. Some of them were terrified. I know people that sent in sick leave for purely psychological reasons. They just could not handle it. The fear was real there. There's also the risk of boredom, and although every child is affected, that does not mean a child cannot drop back from current educational standards. There are real worries about this. There are people that worry about losing their athletic scholarships, because basically the year was put back, and a year in an athlete's life is like 20. There are things we have to deal with, the fallout. We need to put psychologists and psychiatrists and counselors and therapists in the schools. And I mean all schools. I don't mean a select few. They need to be available more than they are now in the schools to deal with some of these issues. We have to deal with the job loss, and that affects children too. The job loss is real. We all know it. These are issues that psychologically affect people when mommy and daddy have to basically divide a potato among 5. And this is happening. They settle for a piece of potato and a gravy. That affects families to the highest degree. And that's where things like the honorable member for St. Michael's South Central would have brought up domestic issues, domestic violence. It is not easy when nobody in the house is working. Tempers flare. And I have met some that were victims of domestic violence. And that goes both ways. People see it as women being abused, but men are being abused too in these circumstances, even if it's only verbally. That is a real issue in this COVID epidemic. And the crime situation, as everybody sees, is no secret. The crime situation seems to be almost spiraling out of hand. And I know a lot of it is attributed, or can be attributed, to COVID. These are things we need to look at, because they will come back to bite us in the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years. And it's a real worry for me and other members of the population. Speaking of domestic issues, there are currently mothers, and I spoke to a nurse recently with the deepest of worries. There are currently mothers giving birth in the hospital and have nowhere to go when they come out. In my time, and it sounds like that's years ago, but it was years ago, we made sure there was a questionnaire on the forms that asked for, I'm not sure if it's still present, asked for if you have running water in your house, if you have electricity in your house, so that you know where the new mother is going and the child. There have been instances recently where a mother and a baby had to be rescued from a drug hole, nowhere else to go. Luckily, she's in rehab now. But we have issues like that we need to address and get at. I am aware of instances, I can't locate the people where mothers sell out their daughters. Some of them are mentally subnormal. I've one in my constituency. I can't find her because she moved out to the constituency, but I'm working on that. So these are things where the Child Care Board has to be much more vigilant, if it isn't already. The government industrial school too, as it stands, the government industrial school is almost a bane to my existence. I don't believe in it. I don't believe how it's structured now. I don't think it's the answer for rehabilitation of an 11, 12, 13-year-old child. These are things that need to be looked at in this environment because children will give trouble. If you can't socialize and socialize correctly and get the proper learning, children will give trouble. And the only answer, or one of the answers, cannot be the government industrial school. We read in the papers lately about a young lady that was basically in prison, a 14-year-old child. If it were up to me, I would squash that whole institution and start from scratch. But these are the realities we have to face. We really have to face and bear that in mind. One of the things I want to speak about is the vaccine. Truth is, I only know what I have read, and it's okay to tell the Barbadian public to take the vaccine. Don't mind the rumors. It's for your own good. But we have to spend a lot of time on education. We have to spend, it cannot be only governmental policy. We have to coordinate well with the players, the medical professionals, so that we have a system in place, educational system in place, before we bring the information to the public. There are people that have real fears of vaccination. Real fears, basically because they don't understand it. And we need to address that. I've had big men crawl under my office table to avoid an injection. Big men faint away in my chair to avoid an injection. So it's not as simple as saying the vaccine will be here soon, as big as the member for the city. But it's not as simple as saying the vaccine will be here, you have to take it, make it mandatory. I'm seeing things on Facebook saying make it mandatory. It's a lot more than that. Even the simple vaccines that we have been dealing with for years, up to now is not as bad as it was, say, 10 years ago. Up to now is a challenge. And a parent cannot tell you why that they do not, other than the obvious allergies, which aren't common. They cannot tell you why they don't want the vaccine, some for religious reasons, but you're usually able to turn them over. So let's take the vaccination a little more seriously than just saying it's coming, you have to take it. The public and Barbadians are smart. We did not educate them for no good reason. They are smart and they just need the information. And I believe most people will be on board. I was one that was skeptical when SARS and H1N1 came out. To be honest, I didn't go for it up to this day. But this is one that I would honestly support because this is really and truly a life or death situation. I want to encourage research in the Caribbean and in Barbados with the attendant funding with respect to COVID. Because it's obvious to many of us that although a few members of the public did contract COVID, most of them were asymptomatic. And I would love to see what the research is on that. Why is it that our population is doing so well? Yes, all kudos to the powers that be that made sure our borders were secure and still are making sure that that is happening. But we have to we have to be ever vigilant on it because the pandemic is not over. I have discussed, I am getting information from people that work. It's important, for instance, the psychiatric hospital is all well and good, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I got a report this week that people are being quarantined but not being tested, so you quarantine for 2 weeks. Things like that, we can't afford the holes. Can't afford the holes. I walked into one of the polyclinics recently, not medical, but to go to another department, and it was able to take my temperature and walk right through. If I came in with COVID, there's no way they could find me. So we have to not slacken up on what we're doing. It's important. It's really important. Pandemic is not over. I keep saying this, but although we are doing well, it gives the public a sense of security. And I'm gonna take a little slack for this later, but I would like it to start in this room. I came in here this morning and very few members had masks on. They took mine off because it has to become a habit. I am so used to wearing it. I was downstairs eating my lunch and had my meat cut and realized, oh, mask still on. It has to become that kind of a habit that we don't even think about it. And it has to start with us, though. It's all right to preach and say, yes, put on your mask, make sure you're distant 6 feet or however much, 3 with the mask, 6 without. But we have to set the example. And I try my best to do it everywhere I go. We have to set the example. I want to also comment this may be my final, let's see. I want to comment on what the Honorable Leader of the Opposition said in congratulating the Honorable Member for St. Philip West on the notion that we do not treat past prime ministers and members of parliament as we should. In the US, a president is always a president. They're not former presidents, they're presidents. And it hurts me a little bit when I pass the Erskine Sandiford Center. And the first sign I see is Ross University. The biggest and brightest sign is Ross University. And the smallest sign is Erskine Sandiford Center. Something like that, although it seems trivial, it is important. He is still a prime minister in my eyes and should be still a prime minister for the members of the public. And I think that needs to be rectified. A visit to the island, he's in essence a hero to us. Not a national hero, you know what I mean, being put up. But he's one of the founding members, one of the prime ministers that got Barbados to where it was. And to come, and the first person I see light up pretty at night, Ross University, that's a slap in the face of a former prime minister, or should I say of Prime Minister Erskine Sandiford. And things like that need to be addressed. We cannot treat our own like that. We cannot treat our own like that. When I was working in the polyclinics, even now, if a nurse comes into my clinic, if any healthcare worker, I see them first. We have to respect our own and give them the due respect that they deserve. That is one that I wanted to speak on. It's not related to the not so much, but I wanted to touch on that. And the last thing I want to say is that nothing new, but keep up the effort. Let us keep up the effort. Let us do what we know that we should do. It's in our children now wearing masks. We have done so well. We have done so well. And it's not only that we were lucky, but we were smart. We were smart. I myself had doubts with the ports of entry. I was nervous. The word I wanted to use, I can't use it here. But I was nervous, so nervous when it felt like it was taking too long to close the borders. But I am glad, as the members say, I stayed the course because it proved useful. We are trying our best, of course, to get people back to work. Every day you get WhatsApp saying a job might be available, getting people back to work, that's important. But let us look after our country and our children. Please put the children first. They are the ones that will lead the country in another few years. So let's look out for them, get the councillors on board, and do what we are doing. Thank you so much for the bill. I appreciate the efforts, and thanks for your time, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me, first of all, thank all honorable members who had the opportunity this morning and this afternoon to speak on both of these bills. The Humanitarian Service Award Bill, as well as the Gold Award of Achievement Amendment Bill. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Prime Minister in her opening commented on the fact that this COVID-19 pandemic has perhaps united our entire nation. I want to echo those sentiments, sir, because I believe that even on the basis of what we heard here throughout the course of this debate, it is clear that all hands have been on deck in relation to this pandemic, whether you are on the backbench, whether you are in the opposition, whether you were part of the trade union movement, whether you were part of the private sector. It is clear that even in this room, there was consensus for the most part about the fact that as Barbadians, we had to rise to the occasion in order to fight what many of us described as the enemy, because we recognized that if we were not to do so, our very survival and the survival of future generations would end up in jeopardy. I start there, sir, because I had the opportunity to be away from this country for a short period after coming to office in 2018. And I had the opportunity to do a lot of reflection. I had the opportunity to observe even not only the leadership, but certainly to observe from afar other colleagues who are ministers in government, being able to respond to what I believe to have been one of the most difficult periods in our history. A period where we came to office having to put back together a country because of the economic downturn, the number of downgrades that we had seen over the course of the previous decade. And at the time, while I was away, I believed that, you know, this was perhaps one of the most major crises that we could possibly face as an administration. I believe that, you know, from afar, I was watching all of my colleagues burning the midnight oil, trying to put together as many different policies, as many different things as they possibly could in order to be able to take Barbadians through this difficult time and to make some very tough decisions as it related to our economic survival and how we would certainly be able to sustain the social fabric of this country. But sir, I then had the opportunity to watch the response of not only the cabinet, but the wider extended government and certainly the Prime Minister of Barbados respond to a COVID-19 pandemic. And it is not a case of blowing your own horn, but I honestly believe that leadership matters. And this pandemic demonstrated, along with the steps that we have taken in relation to the economic recovery plan for this country, that when you have strong leadership, when you have someone with a vision, steering the ship and making sure that all hands are on deck, there is almost a certain guarantee in terms of the survival of an entire nation. Sir, many of us asked the question whether we could have survived this period if there was somebody else at the helm. And I honestly believe that we could probably not have. There are many who were critical in the early stages when, you know, we heard the outbreaks taking place in China, and then later the various decisions that were taken by this administration. And there will always be critics because, you know, when you are not in the driver's seat, it is always easier to try to navigate from the passenger seat to tell people where they must go. But the one thing that I recognize over the course of the past few months is that being at the helm is certainly not an easy task, and it is certainly not an easy road. And it means that sometimes you have to make some very difficult decisions if it is that you're going to not only plan for today, but certainly to plan for the future as well. And I watched, sir, over the course of the past few months, this entire team and this administration and across Barbados pull together to be able to do what I consider to be, you know, just an amazing feat to try to pull this society together in these very difficult times. And again, I want to reinforce that leadership does in fact matter. Whether it is the honorable member for the city, who, as others have said, has perhaps aged during this period, not through any fault of his own, but because he understands his commitment, sir, to the people of this country, and he understands his commitment to the portfolio with which he holds. But I watched a gentleman who served with me from opposition. I watched him pretty much age before my eyes and make certain sacrifices even as it relates to his constituents, because I know that he could not always be there on the front line with his constituents, as many of us sometimes cannot be because of the demands of the job in these particular times. But the reality is I have watched the honorable member for the city continue in the face of all the challenges to continue to not only hold up himself, but also his ministry, his staff, and all those who have to work every single day to ensure that Barbadians are safe. I want to thank him personally and publicly, sir, as others have done, because on every opportunity that I think we are given to be able to say thank you to the Honorable Minister, member for the city as well, I think we have to do so, because I think we have to remind Barbadians of the work that he has done, but also the work that he and his entire staff have continued to do in giving service to this country. He has presided over all of the staff who, whether they worked in the labs, whether they were the persons who were visiting the various organizations on many occasions to explain to people what the COVID-19 virus was, what was to be expected, how they were to protect themselves. And we had the opportunity to go not only to the various ports of entry, but certainly to speak to even people in relation to education about exactly what to expect and how to prepare themselves. And I think that, again, that spoke volumes, because these individuals were willing to not only educate in these times, but certainly to put themselves at risk at a period of time when a lot about this virus was practically unknown. So we are here this afternoon, sir, to not only recognize those persons who form part of a very wide list of individuals who we consider to be the frontline workers, but we also recognize by our extended comments all Barbadians who, in whether small ways or big ways, stepped up to the plate during this period in order to do something which really required them to go beyond the call of duty. And we are extremely grateful. And as a government, we recognize that it's not enough just to simply say thank you alone. But I believe that by this small feat, which is by passing legislation that would allow us to now recognize those persons at the appropriate time in the appropriate way, it is again a further symbol of the sincerity with which certainly this administration and certainly many of the people of this country want to treat to the persons who kept food on our table, the toilet paper that the honorable member for St. Peter spoke about, made sure that even as I know the Honorable Attorney General and I had to make decisions as to who was able to receive passes, that we did so based on what we considered to be emergency situations. And sir, let me just tell you that there were many people who requested all kinds of things, because for the most part during that period, everyone had to make some form of adjustment to their lifestyle. Even you, sir, I'm sure, like many of my colleagues, believe that they should have received emergency passes during that first early stage of the lockdown. And wisdom prevailed, because we also had to make a decision that we too, as persons who would interface with constituents, that we could not expose ourselves, at least all of us could not expose ourselves to everyone, because we really did not know how this particular pandemic would unfold. And in fairness, there were some who were not comfortable with the restrictions that were placed on them. Many people wanted to still be on the ground, and eventually, with greater wisdom coming from the health professionals, we were able to make certain relaxation to the rules to allow greater movement. But those requests came, sir, from all parts of Barbados, all organizations, not only the people who were feeding people across this country, and I want to really say thank you to all of the organizations, the Homeless and Vagrant Society, all of the NGOs that, on a regular basis were stepping up to the plate to fill the breach, and in many cases, putting themselves and certainly the lives of the persons who volunteer on a regular basis at risk, to be able to make sure that we cater to that portion of the population that are often forgotten. And I really want to say, sir, that even in that time, what struck me was that there were many other countries, large countries, that were not looking after their homeless population. There were many countries who could not get it right in terms of how to deal with the people who were most vulnerable. But this government was able, along with the Ministry of Health and all of the officials, and certainly the social care ministries, to be able to work with the entities in Barbados that help us to fill that breach in our society. And I think we owe them as well certainly a debt of gratitude for stepping up to the plate and making sure that they complied with all of the things that needed to be put in place to make their facilities safe, to make their volunteers safe, and to make sure that we were able not to see a major fallout from that particular segment of the population. During that period, sir, it also, I think, for me, opened my eyes in relation to our relationship with the social partnership as well. Barbados has always boasted of its strong relationship and ties with the social partnership. But that period also gave me an opportunity, as I chaired a number of the meetings with my colleagues on the subcommittee, an opportunity to engage with the Honourable Member for St. George North, also the the head of the private sector organizations, Ms. Tanis, as well as Mr. Clark and others, and a wide cross-section of people in the private sector who shared their views in relation to how we would resume work, but also how we would deal with the issues of lockdown. It was an interesting period, sir, because you know, the Honourable Member for St. George North's voice was very loud and boisterous in many of our meetings, being the voice of Labour, not the lone voice, but certainly a very loud voice, in reminding us at every occasion the importance of Labour in the equation. And the fact that, you know, as she said earlier, that you know, even the small people matter, that we started to realize during this period that it wasn't just the people who had the academic qualifications and the technical skills, but it was also the very people who were the cashiers, the gas attendants, you know, the people who were supplying the bread, and, you know, the pastries. Those were the people who rose to the occasion and with perhaps armed with very little knowledge about, you know, how you would contract the virus and whether you were safe, we're still prepared to be out there with the restrictions that we have put in place to be able to service the entire population. Then there were the people who worked in the ports of entry. And they, in particular, again, rose to the occasion in a way, sir, that, I mean, I think we may not even truly appreciate as a population all that was done. I know we recognize a number of persons who assisted with the cruise ships. I'm taking people who were on board, in particular the crew, to safety, transporting people from the ports of entry to make sure that they could get to their final destinations. Many of us, again, could never imagine what that period was like. And I can certainly say, sir, that there may be some things that, you know, many of us who are on the subcommittee will never be able to say. But the fact is, it was not easy during that period, managing all of the different interests and trying to not only keep our citizens safe, but certainly to be able to plan for a Barbados after COVID. And that fundamentally was what was at the forefront of our mind, no matter what we were doing. How do we keep Bajans safe now? But at the same time, there must be life after COVID. And whether it was the private sector echoing that sentiment, whether it was Labour echoing that sentiment, or whether it was the government echoing that sentiment, it was clear that no matter what we did, that we had to make sure that we preserved a Barbados that we could all still be able to live in and to work in and to feel safe in when the COVID-19 pandemic was over, whenever that would take place. So the criticisms came about the shutdown, the lockdown. I mean, there was at one point, I remember I actually sat and laughed when I saw the memes about shutting down the country and taking away Bajans rum, because it was as though you had taken away a prized possession from the people of this country. But again, we understood as a cabinet, we understood as a subcommittee that there were certain restrictions that we had to put in place in order to make sure that Barbadians also did not disobey the protocols that we were putting in place for them to be safe. And I can certainly stand here now, sir, and I can smile about it and I can laugh about it. But believe me that during that period, many of us were not laughing because we knew that we had to make some very serious decisions in order to keep our citizens safe. And we certainly had to make sure that we made decisions that kept our frontline workers safe as well, whether it was the same doctors, whether it was the port workers, whether it was the persons traversing from the airport to take out the cruise ship passengers, and certainly the employees of the cruise ships. Those were things that we had to have front of mind in whatever we did. So while it may have seemed as though it was taken away, you know, in a sense, the lifeline for many Barbadians, many people were not able to frequent places as they would like. The one thing I heard my colleague from St. Peter speak to earlier, is that the one thing we did throughout the entire period, and we continue to do, is to listen to the people. So when it was that people were complaining about the times and about the restrictions, we tried it for a few days, a few weeks, and then we made the changes once we had listened to all of the various individuals who weighed in. We never said as an administration that, you know, we had all the answers, because certainly when we looked across the seas, it was clear that nobody had all the answers. And we, even in relation to education, we took a decision early on, and I will never forget this, because it really demonstrated how quickly things can change. And things change overnight. One day we were having a consultation with our teachers online. We were talking about how safe schools were. We were talking about keeping children in school. We were talking about the fact that the science was telling us that, you know, the children were not the target in terms of this virus. And I walked in the afternoon and heard that a 12-year-old in New York City had been the first child that had contracted this virus. Shortly after that, sir, we then had our first 2 cases in Barbados, not children, but our first 2 cases in mid-March. And we took a decision then that in the interests of all Barbadians, and certainly with the uncertainty that would have been presented to us, that we had to take a decision at that point in time to not just keep the persons with comorbidities safe, but we wanted to make sure that we protected our children, because they would be the future generation of this country as well, sir. So we had to take some hard decisions. And yes, I've heard the comments of other colleagues in relation to education and the concerns that they have, as I do, in relation to what this period has done to education of our young people in particular. The fact of the matter is, sir, that, you know, all of the learning speaks to the fact that this lost time, this lockdown, this shutdown, this restriction of hours, all of the wearing of masks, the physical distancing, the time away from school, is likely to do a lot of damage to a number of students. And particularly, many of us know all those students who, even in normal times, fall below the line, they fall through the cracks. They're in that at-risk category. They're the ones who have a lot of social and behavioral issues that they are dealing with, whether in the home or, you know, in the communities. And we know that they, more than any other set of students, are the ones that must be on our radar, particularly as we try to bounce back as a nation. We have started consultations with our students, and I started last week because I felt that the students needed the opportunity to be able to speak about their experiences. Just as we said when we started the last term that we wanted our students to be able to spend time not talking about maths and English and hardcore subjects, but we wanted them to be in a position to speak about their experiences during the lockdown, because we understood that there were lots of mental health issues that we were dealing with children having to be back home for long periods, with parents being laid off, you know, with them being exposed to all kinds of things that normally the school environment serves to protect them from. We understood that we had to talk to them, and we started that conversation with them, sir. And I want to, again, commend and applaud the young people who attended the session, because they spoke openly and candidly about wanting to get back to school. As I think the sentiments were expressed just yesterday when I met with teachers as well in a consultation at both the primary and the secondary level, where people would like to see a face-to-face engagement again, because despite all that we've tried to do in terms of devices and accessibility and connectivity, there is a very real concern, no matter how anxious and how apprehensive you may be about the COVID-19 pandemic and all of its impact, there is a very real concern about the lost time that students are experiencing as a result of not being able to engage in a face-to-face environment. And it therefore means that we have started our conversation with the member for the city, and I know he's in discussions with his team, to look at what the science is saying, to look at what it is that we need to do as a country, as a Ministry of Education, following all of the specific protocols that we can possibly follow to make sure that we address the issues that have been raised by our students and our teachers, sir, because the truth is that we have, to a large extent, contained our local transmission of the cases and community spread. And we therefore have to ask ourselves some questions during this period as to where do we go as far as face-to-face education is concerned over the course of the next couple of months. These are real issues that are engaging the attention of the cabinet. They have been engaging the attention of the Ministry of Health and certainly Minister of Health as well, because we recognize that it cannot be business as usual. We are going to have to play serious catch-up to make sure that students do not continue to lose valuable time away from school during this particular period. And so those discussions are ongoing, and hopefully we will be in a position to speak to the country as it relates to that. But we have heard the sentiments expressed. We meet with our principals shortly, I believe tomorrow, and we also meet with the unions as well to discuss the way forward as it relates to students who are doing, whether it is 11+ examinations, whether it is CSEC, CXC. But we also recognize that this is not a conversation simply about students who are preparing for an exam, because it is also a conversation about every single student who has been impacted, from the child at the nursery level who is not able, because of the mask, in many cases covering the face, to be able to understand exactly what the teacher is saying because the lips are covered. It is a conversation about the children who are hearing and visually impaired and how they've been able to adjust in this situation as well. It is about what is also in the best interest of our teachers and our students, and trying to find the appropriate balance to be able to make sure that we can return people into a safe environment in the best possible way, sir. So those concerns expressed by the leader of the opposition and certainly by other colleagues as well, we are more than mindful that there are real issues that are confronting us right now, but they are also confronting every other territory in the world. I have told every meeting that I have addressed that the reality is that Barbados is extremely fortunate, even though we have challenges in education, because our children are still going to school, even if it is for a limited time, even if it is a half a day, 2 days a week, 3 days a week. We have tried, with the help of our teachers and our principals, to find a way to accommodate children. But we know that we need to do more if we are to certainly make sure that that face-to-face element is certainly contained. We recognize, sir, that even as we talk about these individuals who have given humanitarian service to Barbados during this period, that even in education as well, we've had a number of donors who have given selflessly to make sure that children had the devices to go to school. And I also, again, want to reiterate that, you know, we could not have been able to get through this period without the help of private individuals, private sector organizations, people who believe and love Barbados and will do anything for Barbados, that stepped up to the plate and basically said, we want to help. What is it that you need in terms of technology? What is it that you need in terms of devices? Because we recognize that there is a need. You also had the teachers who, even though we were in so-called lockdown, tried to find a way to still engage with students, to hold their hand and to talk them through the process, sir. And so while we may not, in this situation today, identify every single category of person that is classified as frontline, the reality is that we can all find examples of people who rose to the occasion during the COVID-19 pandemic to be able to assist in some particular way. Sir, for me, you know, the question was asked by the honorable member for St. Michael Northwest, whether the award in some way was being devalued by increasing the number of persons who are entitled. And, you know, I think he perhaps better than any of the rest of us, having served in this particular administration previously, is well aware, because I certainly am, sir, because I have been a member of this party for as long as I've known myself, is well aware that when this administration is in power, the one thing that this party has been known for is highlighting the achievements of its people, not selecting and handpicking some people, but making sure that all loyal sons and daughters of this soil are recognized for the contribution that they make to Barbados, whether here or outside of Barbados. I do not believe, sir, as we move to discussions on removing Barbados to a republic, that we are at the point anymore where we must follow what the colonial masters did and only have a few honors being trickled out to the privileged few from time to time every year, sir. I believe that as educated Barbadians, people who have a common history of people oppressing us, that we have a responsibility to also set examples for our young people to look up to. And if that means allowing and empowering ordinary Barbadians to be able to share in the space that we say these are the persons who have stood out because of their humanitarian contribution. These are the persons who have stood out because of their service to country. These are the persons who have stood out in their respective disciplines, sir. Then I believe that in a modern day Barbados, we have a responsibility to widen the number of opportunities for Barbadians to be recognized and certainly to be able to have a space within the acknowledgement from us as a nation. The Pride of Barbados Award, sir, again, another example of us as a government being able to recognize not only people within communities, ordinary Barbadians who have given us service, but certainly being able to recognize people who live outside of Barbados. Because the one thing that in the last decade, many people seem to have forgotten is that common phrase by Kofi Annan that Barbadians punch above their weight. And this administration, whether it has been the national heroes, whether it has been making sure that we highlight the contributions of our artists, or writers, or poets, whoever, sir, this administration has been known and has spearheaded the charge for making sure that people who have contributed in any particular sphere in this country have been afforded their correct due. And therefore, sir, I want to assure the honorable member, who I know sometimes he's a little mischievous and, you know, wants to be a little controversial, but I know deep down in his bosom that he understands that the Barbados Labour Party did not thrust him out of their bosom. He actually left the bosom of the Barbados Labour Party, but he left behind a party that recognizes its people and that will continue to acknowledge the contribution of people of all walks of life. When we sat the other day watching the persons being honored for independence, you know, the stories of the fish vendor and the person who worked hard in Barbados to be able to, you know, achieve significant milestones in this country, you know, sir, that is who we are. As the Prime Minister would say, that is who we are. We recognize people for their significant achievements overseas, but we also recognize the ordinary Barbadian, the hawker, the fisherman, the person who has been on the cultural landscape of this country. We recognize everybody because we understand that the wheels of this government and this country don't turn without all of the pieces in the wheel working together, sir. That is this administration. And so he must be assured that this is not about watering down anything, because I assure you that any other opportunities that we are given to highlight the achievements of our people, we will continue to do so. What, however, we have to do, and all of us have to collectively commit to it, is to making sure that we don't just simply pin an award, but that we educate people about the persons who we have been awarding and why. So it is no longer enough simply to unveil a plaque of an artist's impression, but not to mention what the artist's visual interpretation of the actual mural was supposed to be. Because all it is then is an inscription on a wall of who opened the plaque, which nobody pays attention to. But instead, we have to get to the things now that really matter, the things that will inspire another generation. And so it is not enough any longer to simply have just the insignia, but we have to start to teach about these people within our schools. We have to encourage our creators to do videos on these on persons who have given an outstanding service. I hope that during this period, and certainly over the next couple of months, even through the Ministry of Culture, that we can see videos emerging on the COVID-19 pandemic and Barbados' response, and documentaries about Harrison's Point and the things that Barbados did in the early stages to create safety, you know, and a platform for if we found ourselves in a situation where we needed to cater to our people, sir. We have to understand that these are stories that must be told. And while at the same time, all of us have been affected by this pandemic, it's not like Hurricane Jeanette, where only a few people experienced it, or Hurricane or Tomas. This is something which has impacted everyone, and we have to find ways through culture and through the visual arts to be able to capture and to document this period. The honorable member for the city should be being interviewed, and in another 20 or 30 years, another generation should be hearing his experiences. The honorable prime minister should be able to speak to some of the experiences of managing a country in a crisis and being a leader to the region in a period when there was not much leadership globally as well. Those are the things that we need to talk about and we need to be proud about, because, you know, sometimes we forget that we have a lot to be proud about. We want to complain about things that are happening or not happening, but we forget how much we have to be proud and we have to be thankful for in this little rock, sir. To have people wanting to come to Barbados and stay for an entire year to work remotely is, again, tremendous by our leadership of this country. To craft something which allows people who I understand are even now volunteering in different ways in this country while they're here working to come. It wasn't enough simply to just know that we have a beautiful island and clean beaches, perhaps even more clean than they would have been because they don't have all the pollution in them over the last couple of months. We understood that we had to do something else because it wasn't enough to sell sea and sand, because you could go and you could get that anywhere else, get on a plane and go somewhere else. We understood we had to do something different. And the one thing that Bajans must take away from this period is the fact that this administration has tried to keep them safe. We may not have always made decisions that met their satisfaction, or that they always understood all of the fine details. But the one thing I want to assure the country is that we have always done what we had to do and made decisions in the best interest of the people of this country, first and foremost, sir. So, sir, I also just want to end by saying, you know, I always talk about the COVID positives. You know, I have friends who, during the lockdown, became bakers. They picked back up professions that they had long put aside. You know, the people dusted off tools that they had not used for a long time. I'm sure, sir, even yourself, I'm sure you did some painting around the house or something that the wife was probably surprised that you even had the ability to do. But the fact of the matter is that this period highlighted for us not just the people who were on the front line, but it highlighted a lot of cracks in the system. It highlighted even for us a lot of the things that we needed to focus on. And you know, whether it is in terms of labor and how we treat to labor, it also focused on infrastructure. It focused on the things that, you know, are in a lot of our legislative regimes in terms of how we treat to the workplace, how we treat to safety. All we are talking about is, you know, washing up sinks and sanitizing stations. Things that perhaps should have been on the agenda and high on the agenda before are now more front of mind for Barbadians because of what has happened during this pandemic, sir. And I'm glad that, you know, we can reflect on this period now. We can acknowledge the people who have contributed to getting us to this point. But at the same time, we have to take from the negatives during this period the positive things that COVID has left us with and continue to leave us with. We cannot retreat. We can't surrender, as the honorable member for the city continues to repeat, because we are not yet out of the woods. But the one thing I believe Barbadians must be assured is that, you know, we are an amazing set of people who are committed to a common cause, and that is to keeping Barbadians as safe as they possibly can be. So, sir, I believe that we have taken all steps that we can. We've introduced our school monitors. We've had all of the COVID-19 relief in terms of making sure that we've been able to get people back to work. Some of those same workers who are on the front line, you know, we've tried to take care of as many people in our population as we possibly can. And the commitment is there, sir, that we will continue to ensure that our people remain safe. I just want, again, to thank all honorable members for the support, including the Leader of the Opposition, because I do believe that we are united when it comes to these types of legislation. And in terms of the focus of this administration, I know that we will certainly, once funds are available, ensure that those persons who have contributed, that are identified as the persons on the front line, that at the appropriate time, the necessary contribution and certainly compensation will certainly be put in place to recognize their contribution. So, sir, I beg to move that you do now.
Bill read a
Sorry,
second time.
I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that you do now leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of the bill.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Number 2, humanitarian.
This House is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that clause 1 do not stand. Madam Chairman, I beg to move that clause 1 do not stand part.
Question is that clause 1 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 2 do not stand part.
Question is that clause 2 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 3 do not stand part.
Question is that clause 3 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 4 do not stand part.
Question is that clause 4 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 5.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 5 do not stand part.
Question is that clause 5 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 6.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 6 do not stand part.
Question is that clause 6 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 7.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 7 do not stand part.
Question is that clause 7 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 8.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 8 do not stand part.
Question is that clause 8 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honor the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee.
Question is that I do not report to His Honor the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Yes, ma'am.
Chairman of committees has reported the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be now passed and cited as the Barbados Humanitarian Service Award Act 2020.
The question is that this bill be passed and so cited. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This bill is passed and so cited.
Order number 4, sir. In the name of the Honorable Leader of the House, to move the second reading of the Gold Award of Achievement Amendment Bill 2020.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that the bill be read a second time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that you do not leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of the bill.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Clause 1.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 1 do not stand part.
Question is that clause 1 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 2 do not stand part.
Question is that clause 2 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 3 do not stand part.
Question is that clause 3 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honor the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee.
Question is that I do not report to His Honor the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees has reported the passing of one bill in committee. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that the bill be read a third time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be now passed and cited as the Gold Award of Achievement Act, Cap 401.
The question is that this bill be passed and so cited. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This bill is passed and so cited.
Order number 5, sir. In the name of the Honorable Minister of International Business and Industry, to move the second reading of the Companies Amendment Bill 2020.
Honorable Sir Michael North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a relatively short and simple amendment, and I intend to make a very short and simple presentation. This is all part of Barbados' compliance with the OECD's exchange of information on request standard, which has as one of its core items the whole issue of the availability of beneficial ownership information, or to be more specific, accurate and up-to-date beneficial ownership of companies and legal entities and arrangements. Brief background, Mr. Speaker, you would recall that Barbados was assessed ultimately, fairly recently, in relation to its compliance with this standard. In fact, the assessment was completed in April of this year. And Barbados was found, in relation to the period, Mr. Speaker, that spanned July 2015 to June 2018, which predates this administration, Barbados was found to be only partially compliant with that standard. and therefore that was not good. As you know, it also triggered an automatic blacklisting by the European Union. More recently, Mr. Speaker, Barbados applied for a supplementary review to the same OECD and was granted that supplementary review, which will take place at a date and time to be announced by the OECD. What we are doing here today, Mr. Speaker, really is strengthening our hand in relation to when that actual supplementary review takes place. As it stands now in Barbados, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of regulators for companies. You have the International Business Unit regulating corporate and trust service providers, the Central Bank regulating financial institutions, Financial Services Commission regulating insurance companies, etc. All of them are empowered to regulate the entities under their purview, to regulate and monitor them. But there are, Mr. Speaker, also a large number of companies that fall to be regulated by the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office, otherwise simply referred to as CIPO. And in particular, Mr. Speaker, these companies are companies that actually earn less than $1 million annually in gross revenue. Those companies are all regulated by CIPO. Now, a critical component of monitoring or regulation by any entity so empowered is the authority and to be able to access the required information. And today, this is what this amendment is really about in relation to CIPO. In particular, when we look at the annual return, which is required to be filed, well, obviously annually, in relation to companies at CIPO, you see one notable statement in it. And it says this at clause 13. I certify that the company has maintained at its registered office the records pertaining to the company, including the records pertaining to beneficial ownership in accordance with sections 170 to 172 of the Companies Act. And that is really at the core of what we are looking at today. Because while a lot of work has been done in relation to the regulation of companies falling under the International Business Unit and the other regulators, and they've been done extremely well, we also have to recognize that the entities that fall under the purview of CIPO similarly have to be regulated as well. So CIPO has to be fully empowered to be able to regulate. And in this context, that means to be able to access information and verify that declaration in the annual return that there's to be found at the registered office of the company information pertaining to the beneficial ownership, that is a correct statement. They have to go and verify that the information is actually there, and also that it is accurate and up to date. Hence, Mr. Speaker, the amendment today, you will see in the current section 175 of the Companies Act that we are amending, we are amending by addition, that it is headed access to records. And subsection 1 empowers directors and shareholders to be able to examine the records of a company and take extracts free of charge. Subsection 2 empowers shareholders of a company upon request to take a copy of the articles and so on of the company. Subsection 3 empowers creditors and their agents to be able to access information. And subsection 4 says that any person may, during the usual business hours of the company and upon payment of a reasonable fee, examine the records of the company and make copies of those records or take extracts therefrom. Any person would obviously include CIPO as well, but it's a very, very weak section. It firstly speaks about you must do this during the usual business hours of the day, upon payment of a reasonable fee. The hours, the usual hours of business of a company may vary from company to company, and then you must pay a reasonable fee. Who is to determine what a reasonable fee is? So it is very, very, very nebulous. And more importantly, the regulator, in this case, KIPO, does not really have the right to insist that you produce records and that you allow me to examine your books, which is absolutely necessary if we are to say that we are meeting that standard. So you will see that the amendment that is before the chamber today does just that. It empowers the registrar to be able to require a company to produce any of its books, records, or documents that are required to be kept by the company under the provisions of the Companies Act. It also, perhaps, Mr. Speaker, more importantly, empowers the registrar to appoint a person in writing to examine the books, records, and other documents required to be kept by the company. And that will be the mechanism that will actually be used. Really and truly, Mr. Speaker, I hold the view that corporate affairs really ought not even to be a regulator. It really is a registry, and it really should continue in its role as a registry. But because of so many entities that are not covered by other regulators, and more recent amendment that we made, KIPO is now actually no longer just a registry. It is a regulator as well. But the fact of the matter, Mr. Speaker, is that what will happen is that pursuant to the power contained in the legislation, it will in fact designate the compliance unit in the international business unit, to be the entity or the agency responsible for regulating the entities that fall under KIPO. And if I may say, Mr. Speaker, currently, the entities that earn less than $1 million gross in revenue are actually over 30,000. They're over 30,000. That has to be cleaned up because a lot of those are entities that no longer operate. So what is now a work in progress is that you're going through to see how many of the companies on the books in the registry really are totally non-functional and therefore would be struck off from the registry's records. That will lighten things up a lot and make things a lot easier, even in the eyes of the international regulator, because the more companies that you are seen to have to regulate, the higher the burden you're placed under and the more you're scrutinized to see how many of them you're actually doing. So the KIPO is going to use, in any event, as I said, the international business unit, which already has a compliance unit. It has already, if I may sing their praises, they have already done, I believe they may have completed all of the on-site inspections of all of the corporate and trust service providers, of which there are, I think, 103, 105. If not all, they've done certainly a large percentage in the 90s in terms of percentage of those entities. So they're well seized as to how you go from the process of desktop inspections through to on-site inspections, through to meetings and final reports to sanctions. They already know all that, so the KIPO will be relying on them to carry that forward. So we will be able to see that the entities under the purview, all of the entities in Barbados would be properly regulated, and we would be able to report significant progress. In my view, we are certainly, as I said, strengthening our hand for when we have to have the actual supplementary review conducted. Remember, Mr. Speaker, what is being looked at here by the international regulators is the whole issue of tax evasion or tax avoidance by citizens in various countries. Individuals are known to use very, very elaborate corporate structures, so as to hide their identities and hide profits from earnings. So you can have a company X incorporated in Barbados who is owned, or which is owned by company Y, registered in the Bahamas, which is owned by company Z, that's registered in Israel, and then go all the way down. You must always have the ability, once you have a company then registered, ultimately it might be registered in Barbados. You must always have at the registered office of that company in Barbados who the true beneficial, ultimate beneficial owners are of the company. It may be a Canadian citizen that the Canadian authorities are inquiring about to see if he, in fact, is declaring and paying his fair share of taxes in Canada. So that there has to be that ability to trace and always determine who the ultimate beneficial owner of the company is. Or it may well be that people are using these elaborate structures not only to hide the tax liability, but also to launder money. The Attorney General will speak on that aspect of it. I am more focused on the tax bit of it. But I know that there were those who were looking at the penalties in the legislation. And this legislation, these amendments are really not imposing any additional sanctions on businesses. This legislation is merely looking to enforce existing commitments and obligations that entities are required to comply with. As I said, notably, in my case, in terms of the tax point that I'm making here, the fact that you must have beneficial ownership information at the registered office of a company at all times and available upon inspection by the regulator. Now, that is not an unreasonable request. If people are asked to file an annual return every year, it really and truly is a relatively simple document. And there really is not much excuse for companies, no matter how big or how small, filing this annual return. But then some don't file the annual returns. Then they get hit with a $10 a day penalty and they're crying out and crying out and crying out. But really and truly, in my view, it is not unreasonable to ask them to file the return, and the penalty, you don't like to impose penalties, but if you don't pay, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, there's a penalty. Under this amendment, there are also penalties. The first one is if you do not comply with an obligation, you see that it's stated that there's a penalty of $5,000. It is only if you don't pay that penalty that you then go on to a higher penalty, which I think goes up to, I'll tell you in a minute, Mr. Speaker. It goes up then to $500 for every day during which the default continues, not exceeding $15,000. Then if you still don't do it after the $15,000 maximum is reached, then you can incur then a higher penalty or even a term of imprisonment if you do it. But let me just hasten to add one thing, because there are those who would quickly look at the impact on the small businessman, the small business operator. The truth is that, and nowhere in the world does it happen, that all of the entities that fall to be regulated, meaning monitored, inspected, or whatever, are in fact monitored and inspected. Nowhere in the world does it happen. You use a risk rating tool to see which entities fall into low risk, medium risk, or high risk. And you do that usually by virtue of an initial questionnaire sent out to companies, which they can easily respond to and have a risk rating. And when companies are rated as low-risk enterprises or entities, they would hardly, only 1 in a million, would they even be inspected, far less be called upon to do anything at all under the legislation. So nobody has to jump up to say, hey, you're putting $500 there for a man. First of all, the issue of a penalty only arises if you default. That's the first thing you got to understand. If you do what you are supposed to do, the issue of a penalty will never arise. And then in any case, you see, the funny thing is that I can't say that it could never happen, but you know, you can have a very, very large entity that falls far short of all of the requirements it should put in place to guard against money laundering or whatnot. Or you can have a small company that is also hybrid. There are also some small companies that operate in such a way as fronts for big enterprises, so that a big enterprise might appear to be totally compliant with all its manuals in relation to AML stuff and all that, and while operating through a little front man that's selling on the face of it only 20 pairs of shoes a month. That could be happening. While they're sitting back and making a ton. Dirty money. So, but in the ordinary course of things, a small operator, a real small man, once you do the risk analysis, which is the starting point in all this, you're going to find that that operator is such a negligible risk that he will even perhaps only be rated as low risk because he has to be given a rating. So I want those to understand that there's no need to fear the legislation. There's no need to fear the teeth aspect of the legislation because, as I said, really, penalties are only triggered when there is a breach. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't know that there's anything else that I can really say further at this point. If necessary, I would have to rejoin the debate later, but I know my learned friend, the Attorney General, is going to speak on his bit as well. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I commend the amendments to the chamber. As I said, there are things that would strengthen our hand. So far, the news is good in terms of what we got 2 weeks or so ago, but I do not want to really leave any stone at all unturned. Hence, Mr. Speaker, the decision to bring this legislation to make a good situation so far even better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move, Mr. Speaker, that we read a second thing.
I will lead the opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just a few words in contribution to the matter brought before us by my honorable friend out of the north region of St. Michael. And understandably, he is wont to do that which he must, and frequently so in the past year or so, and to bring matters before us will seek to put us more fully in compliance with our obligations vis-a-vis some of the international institutions around international business and trade and so forth. My concern, and briefly to address the matter, is more so revolving around issues coming out of our corporate culture that impact Barbadians more immediately and impact Barbadians negatively. If his past performance is anything to be judged by, I am sure the Honorable Minister will spend much time in giving his energy and effort to addressing the deficiencies in our corporate culture here at home that are a cause for concern to Barbadians. Now, he spoke with reference briefly to the matter of beneficial ownership, and it is issues around beneficial ownership, I suppose, in recent times, which may have caused us to be found wanting at the bar of international institutional opinion on these matters. And while that is important, I think it is of some importance in weight too, that we understand that the regulatory obligation which we must meet to give exposure to ownership issues, claims, must also be must also take into consideration the privacy issue and the need for privacy. And often we perhaps come down in an imbalanced fashion on the need for privacy being afforded to individuals who are privileged to exercise ownership, directorship in our corporate world, while not at the same time giving a sufficient attention to the fact that Bajans have an interest in knowing and have an interest at stake in what obtains in that corporate world. I'm saying simply, therefore, that while we deal with the matter of beneficial ownership and how that makes us look and where that places us with reference to the international context, and where we have to pay due attention to the issue of the obligation vis-a-vis privacy in the extent to which that exists, we've also got to bear in mind always that Barbadians have a right to know, because some of them, many of them, are investors in some of these corporate entities. Recent experiences have taught us bitterly that if we do not know and if we are not privy to important information, we wake up one day to find that our investment has been jeopardized or perhaps totally lost. And therefore, if I may be clear, I'm saying, whereas there must be due regard to privacy to the extent that that matters, there's the other side of the issue, and that is the need to know, the right to know, because you have invested in that corporate entity. So it's not only a matter of satisfying the institutional global entities, the global institutional entities to which we are obligated in one way or another, but it is also a matter of a government seeking to create a climate in which Barbadian interests at home is safeguarded or are safeguarded because of what we put in place to constitute the regulatory framework around these matters. And then I hope I am clear in that I went all around the world and I hope I got home. So whereas we want to eliminate or reduce significantly those issues and dynamics which cause us to be blacklisted or labeled as only partially compliant, and that the minister therefore must do the job he's now seeking to do, again, not for the first time, in the interests of the country, we have also got to bear in mind that if we don't get it right with respect to corporate culture practices in Barbados, the interests of Barbadians at home are jeopardized. And therefore, that is a matter to which we've got to pay attention and balance privacy issues as against investment interests and investor rights. We have a problem, have had a problem in Barbados for a long time as well, around the issue of interlocking directorships or directorates. And big furor years ago, a cause perhaps championed by people like Alombe Motley and now Sir Hilary Beckles and these people. One remembers the challenge on the whole mutual structure. I'm old enough to be aware of these things, Mr. Speaker. And the whole business of interlocking directorships, I do not know, has sufficiently engaged the attention of those who have had responsibility for these matters over the years and across administrations. But I raise it again because I believe perhaps it is my duty so to do. And one can easily find a compromise of their fiduciary responsibilities. I think if you bear reference to the CLICO situation, which is not far behind us, I think one of the findings coming out of that was because of persons occupying multiple spaces as directors across of that corporate structure and some of its entities. Persons gave perhaps or paid greater attention, or for what reason, one reason or another, would have been motivated to give due regard to what is happening in this particular company, in this particular company, in that particular company. So rather than a duty of care to a specific entity within the total corporate structure, you had the expression of multiple interests across various units in that corporate entity, resulting in problems. Beyond that, of course, there's a matter of conflict of interest. Always a bother in any sphere of activity when conflict of interest is a dynamic which attains a place of prominence in the way people behave. Insider information or cross-company trading information, especially if companies are in competition with one another. These are some of the things thrown up out of that kind of a situation. Perhaps the most sinister is the whole business of sectoral consolidation. That's a big, big issue in Barbados. Across quite a few sectors, the consolidation that is taking place within those sectors. And somehow, Barbados, to free itself from these corporate entanglements, must address the issue, in my view, Mr. Speaker, of these interlocking directorships. You are a person who lives in the world of law, and you, I am sure, are very familiar, though your practice predominantly, I think, is criminal law and not corporate law. I'm sure you are aware, and then there are others of your colleagues in this House who are closer to the scene of corporate law, who know what obtains in that culture, and this whole business of interlocking directorship, because this body is this body's friend. This body went to the same school as the other fella up and on, is it, sir? And this body wears the same school tie or school skirt as the other fella. And this is the way these things are arrived at. And the average Barbadian who invests, same church, yes, that too, or same lodge, that works too. In fact, more prominently so, that obtains, oh my goodness, don't carry me down that road. In Barbados, I ain't talking about you, Honorable Attorney General, but we know that there's a problem in Barbados. My goodness, I didn't even want to go down there. At the highest level in Barbados, in this corporate world in which we live. And the average poor Bajan, uninformed as to these things, Mr. Speaker, is investing his or her hard-earned money, not knowing who sits at the controls and who is beholden to who, and who is friend of who, and who is family with who, and who wears the same tie, belongs to the same church, is a part of the same lodge, or a member of the party. Now, these things obtain. There's a world in which we live, and these are issues which we have to address, Mr. Speaker. The size of companies, CLECO, if we understand the nature of the beast, is not to be simply seen in terms of its Barbados institutional persona, 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 companies or whatever obtained here under that banner. But you know of its regional character. You know of its international character as well. It's a massive company, a massive company. And I believe the question is very pertinent as to whether or not the regulatory framework which administrations here in Barbados are able to put in place, these frameworks are sufficient to the cause of regulating these massive companies. It's not only CLECO, that's one that has failed and floundered, but there are others which are still viable and thriving. And you have, I don't call any person's name because you've not in my view, committed any breach serious enough for me to bring attention to you and your size. But there are other companies known to you, Mr. Speaker, that are massive and growing. And they grew up in Barbados, and they've now spread across the region and internationally as well. And the question is, to the extent that it is necessary to have a regulatory framework in place in Barbados, do we have the state capacity to regulate these companies? We talk about companies which are too big to fail. That is a reality. There are also companies which are too big to regulate when you consider the means and capacity which are available to us here in Barbados. The other thing is, Mr. Speaker, this what I call duality that exists in the corporate world. And I see that it is gaining currency even in the government, where you have a chairman and a CEO embodied in the same person. I don't know that that is healthy. And this administration has embarked upon doing that. I think we did it. At the QEH, with the QEH board, a state-related entity. But it also obtains, I think, at the Central Bank of Barbados. And it obtains elsewhere in critical institutions in Barbados. And I do not know that that is healthy, that you have the chairman of a board which is responsible on behalf of ownership for the oversight of the operations of a company, and therefore the oversight of the chief executive officer. And you have the two positions embodied in the same person. Now, there can be arguments made for that, I imagine, but to me, the arguments that fall against that weigh more heavily with me and in terms of my favor. And I say that that is one of the things that we must needs examine before we go too far down that road, where we have the duality of the chairman and the CEO of important, critical, major companies embodied in the same person, even if some of these companies are not only private sector, but maybe state related in terms of their ownership and their operation. Perhaps the last thing I would mention is in the corporate culture with which we are familiar, connectivity, I suppose, matters. And it is not far in our recessed memory that we would find reference to sinister ongoings with reference to the matter of connectivity, where political influence, political connection plays a role in what goes down in financial institutions in Barbados. There's a matter now, I think, is still before the court, and therefore I will not speak to that. But that's fresh in our memories. We don't have to go too far to recall that. But it's a clear example of the fact that the politics of the day and political personalities of the day and the political influence that obtains can be such that it crosses these boundaries, gets into the corporate world, and it becomes a mix that is detrimental to the interests of Barbadians. And I know I dwell too much on that, but political influence, political connectivity may in fact result in companies being victimized and pressured. Political position, we can snigger if we want, but if the politics is not right, if the politics is anyway corrupt, you can see the ugly specter of victimization against some companies rearing its head. Now, the other thing is, the other side of the coin is, it may not be a question of the hand of politics interfering and bringing pressure to bear on companies, but it may be that the eye of politics looks a little bit too much too gently on the goings on in certain companies. In other words, political directorate, the regulator may be aware, but a political eye may not want to look with great scrutiny on what is happening there, or to wink its eye as to what is happening in this company, and therefore the regulator's hands are tied. You catch my drift, Mr. You understand where I'm going with that? I apologize, Mr. Speaker. You understand where I'm going with that? So you have a political directorate, if it is minded so to do, and it's a brand of corruption, will hold or tie the hands of the regulator so that he or she or it cannot go after company A or B. And there is some view which has some measure of currency. That's what happened with respect to CLICO as well. Or it may be that the hand of the political director comes down heavily through the regulator on some company for some reason that serves political ends. I say that for the consideration of my honorable friend on the other side.
Honorable Member for St. Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've agreed to share this particular platform with the honorable member for St. Michael North. But I suppose, to use the cricketing term, he's the opening batsman. I guess this would make me the wicket keeper. But today is not about scoring runs, sir. It is really about helping to address the serious challenges that Barbados has to face. I don't propose to labor too long, but I think it would be remiss of me if I didn't bring this discussion into context, and I apologize for repeating it now almost to the point of ad nausea, but I think it bears repeating that all Barbadians recognize what is at stake. Mr. Speaker, our functioning effectively within the arena of international trade, in the sense of our ability to buy and sell across international borders, depends on something called correspondent banking. And I guess you could call this, I don't know, money laundering 101, but it is important. Correspondent banking is jeopardized when the correspondent bank, that is to say the bank in the overseas jurisdiction that our local bank will send money to. So let me rewind a little bit, sir. If a person wants to do a transaction, let's say in England or even Jamaica, in order for that money to move from Barbados in his First Caribbean or Scotiabank or Republic Bank or First Citizens Bank account, it has to move in US dollars, but it moves into a bank in the receiving jurisdiction. That bank that handles the transfer of the money is called a correspondent bank, and the relationship is called correspondent banking. Think of correspondent, something that moves from one person to another. Not long ago, Mr. Speaker, the Caribbean region, had as many as 160 correspondent banking relationships. So anytime a Barbadian wanted to move money from Barbados for a transaction maybe to pay school fees, maybe to buy books, whatever it was, a merchant might want to buy shoes. Whatever that transaction was, you had a whole set of banks overseas that were willing to move our transactional finances for us. But that has now dwindled significantly. And in the face of money laundering, Mr. Speaker, correspondent banking is jeopardized when the correspondent bank is not able to satisfy itself that arrangements to monitor and suppress money laundering in Barbados are being carried out with sufficient rigor that he doesn't have to worry about it. So in other words, Barbados has a anti-money laundering regime. It has to meet certain minimum standards that are established by the Financial Action Task Force, that is the international regulatory body to deal with money laundering. That sets the benchmarks that we have to meet. And there are many. And Barbados has done very well in the last 2.5 years, moving from near the bottom of the packs, covering off a lot of areas and achieving a fair amount of success. And we can be proud of the work we've done so far, but the fact is that the FATF has said that we've not got where we need to be yet. And we can spend a whole other debate talking about that. I've often referred to the Greek myth of Sisyphus, the ancient king who was required to roll a rock, a huge boulder, up a hill. And at the end, he would get to the top of the hill at the end of the day, but then the rock will roll right back down again. And next morning, Sisyphus got to start the exercise all over. And it's akin to what has happened to us, Mr. Speaker. We've been rolling that boulder up the hill, and when we think we get there for some reason or another, the rules change, something happens, something is twisted and turned, and we have to respond. So the boulder goes back down the hill and we start all over again. Now, let me hurry up. When correspondent banking is put at risk, it challenges and could sometimes even prevent us from doing things that are required of us as a government. Now, I don't want to send off any panic buttons, but just imagine, Mr. Speaker, a situation where the Barbados government needs to buy COVID vaccines and has to send money abroad for the purposes of the purchasing of those vaccines, or the purchasing of the syringes, or the purchasing of the freezers that the vaccines may have to be kept in, or the fridges, whatever it is. But the correspondent bank that we would seek to use in wherever we're going, the England or the US or wherever it is, says, I am not